You think you're solving your life, but what if your mind is actually destroying it, slowly, silently, every single day? It starts small, one thought, then another, then another. A simple moment turns into hours of replaying. What if I said this? What if I made a mistake? And before you realize it, you're not living your life anymore. You're just thinking about it. Your brain tells you it's helping, trying to protect you, trying to control everything. Simply psychology. But the truth is, it's trapping you in a loop of past regrets and future fears. And the worst part? It feels like control, when in reality, you're slowly losing it. Because overthinking doesn't solve your problems. It just keeps you stuck long enough to miss your life completely. And the worst part is, you don't even realize it's happening. So without wasting your time, let's jump into video. Chapter 1. The noise that never stops. Have you ever tried to sleep, but your own mind wouldn't let you? Not because of a sound outside, not because of traffic or rain or someone talking in the next room, but because of something inside your head. A voice, a loop, a feeling that just won't stop. Yeah, that's what we're talking about today. And I want you to really stay with this one, because what I'm about to say is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. There's a kind of noise that no one else can hear. It doesn't come from the world around you. It comes from you, from somewhere deep inside, a place you can't turn off, can't mute, can't walk away from. You wake up in the morning, and before you even open your eyes, it starts. What did I say yesterday? Was that weird? Do they hate me now? Why did I do that? Why am I like this? What is wrong with me? And just like that, the day hasn't even started and you're already exhausted. This is the noise that never stops. Most people think anxiety is about fear, about being scared of something specific, a spider, a dark room, a crowded place. But that's not what this is. This is different. This is quieter, and somehow much louder. This is the voice in your head that replays conversations from 3 years ago, that remind you of your failures at 2 a.m., that tells you you're not good enough, not for that job, not for that person, not for that life you keep dreaming about. And the worst part? You can't argue with it, because it sounds exactly like you. Here's something psychology has known for a long time, but nobody really talks about. The human brain is not designed to make you happy. It is designed to keep you alive. And to keep you alive, it scans constantly. It looks for threats, problems, dangers. It replays past mistakes so you don't make them again. It imagines future disasters so you can prepare. Your brain is doing its job. The problem is, we're not living in caves anymore. There are no lions chasing us. The threats are different now. They're social, emotional, invisible. But your brain doesn't know that. It's still running the same ancient program, still scanning, still alarming, still making noise. And so you sit in your comfortable room, completely safe, completely okay, and still feel like something terrible is about to happen. That's not weakness. That's just biology. A brain doing what it was built to do, in a world it was never built for. But let's go deeper, because this is where it gets really interesting. Have you noticed how the noise gets louder when everything is quiet? When you're busy, running around, working, talking, scrolling, you don't notice it as much. The noise is there, but there's so much other input that it gets buried. But the moment everything slows down, the moment you sit alone with your coffee, or lie down before sleep, or take a shower without your phone, it rushes in, like water through a crack. And that's not a coincidence. We've built our entire modern life around avoiding silence, around filling every gap with something. Music, podcasts, notifications, content. We're consuming constantly, not because we love it, but because stopping feels dangerous. Because stopping means listening, and listening means hearing the noise. I want you to think about someone you know. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's you. Someone who is always busy, always has plans, always something going on. Looks like they love their life from the outside. But sit with them long enough, in a quiet moment, and watch what happens. Watch how uncomfortable they become. Watch how quickly they reach for their phone. Watch how fast they change the subject when things get too real. That's not a person who loves being busy. That's a person who's terrified of being still, because being still means being alone with the noise. Philosophy has been trying to solve this problem for thousands of years. The Stoics said, "It's not what happens to you, it's what you think about what happens to you." Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, wrote to himself every night, not because life was hard from the outside, but because his own mind was loud, and he was trying to manage it. Even then, even at the top of the world. The noise was there. Buddhism calls it monkey mind, the untrained mind that swings from thought to thought, never resting, never settling, always jumping, always reacting. Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher, once wrote something that stopped me cold. He said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Let that land. All of humanity's problems. Not some, all. Because when we can't sit with ourselves, we run, we distract, we chase, we numb, we destroy. We create problems in the outside world just to avoid facing the problem inside. And here's what that noise actually is when you strip it all away. It's unprocessed emotion. That fight you never finished. That grief you pushed down because you didn't have time to fall apart. That version of yourself you're ashamed of. That dream you buried because someone told you it was stupid. It's all still in there, still alive, still moving around, still making noise. Because emotions are not meant to be stored. They're meant to be felt, processed, released. But we were never taught how to do that. We were taught to stay strong, stay focused, keep going. Don't cry in public. Don't be too much. So we kept going, and we kept going, and we kept going. And the noise kept building. There's a moment, and I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, where it all becomes too much, where you're lying there at 3 a.m. and the ceiling is just a ceiling, but it might as well be the entire weight of your life pressing down on you, where you're in a room full of people and you feel completely, terrifyingly alone, where you smile at someone and say, "I'm fine," and you're so far from fine that the word itself feels like a joke. That's the breaking point. That's where the noise becomes unbearable, and you're left with two choices: numb it harder, or finally, face it. Here's the truth that changes everything. The noise is not your enemy. I know that sounds insane, especially right now, when it feels like it's destroying you. But stay with me. The noise is information. It's your inner world trying to communicate something that your conscious mind has been refusing to hear. That constant loop of, "I'm not good enough." That's not the truth about you. That's a wound, an old one, from somewhere in your past when someone, or life itself, made you feel like you weren't. That anxiety about the future, that's not weakness. That's a creative mind with no productive outlet, generating scenarios because it needs somewhere to go. That loneliness in the middle of a crowd, that's not a flaw in you. That's a signal that the connections around you aren't real enough, that you're performing instead of living. The noise is not trying to destroy you. It's trying to tell you something you've been too afraid to hear. So, what do you do with it? You stop running. Not forever, not all at once, but just pause. Instead of scrolling to escape the noise, sit with it for 60 seconds. Just 60. Let it be loud. Let it be uncomfortable. Don't fight it. Don't follow it. Just notice it. Because here's what happens when you stop fighting the noise. It starts to change. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, the way a storm eventually passes. Not because you fought it, but because storms pass when you stop feeding them with resistance. You give it space, and space is what it needs to finally move through you. This is the shift, from make the noise stop to what is the noise trying to say? From treating your own mind like an enemy to treating it like a frightened part of yourself that just needs to be heard. You start to notice patterns. You start to understand yourself, maybe for the first time. You start to see that the thoughts that torment you the most are usually the ones connected to the things you care about the most. Your anxiety about that relationship. You care about love. Your fear of failure. You care about your potential. Your loneliness. You care about real, deep human connection. The noise was never about weakness. It was always about depth. And slowly, not in a week, not because of a single video, but slowly, over time, through practice and patience and a lot of honesty with yourself, the noise doesn't disappear, but it becomes something you can live with. More than that, something you can learn from, something that makes you more human, not less. The most self-aware people I've ever encountered are not the ones who have the quietest minds. They're the ones who have learned to listen to the loud ones. They've stopped pretending the noise doesn't exist. They've sat in the uncomfortable silence and let it teach them. They've done the hard, unglamorous, private work of actually knowing themselves. And what they found on the other side of all that noise was finally, some peace. So the next time it starts, that loop, that voice, that heavy feeling at 2 a.m., don't run from it. Don't numb it. Don't hate yourself for having it. Just ask it a question. What are you trying to tell me? And then, for the first time in maybe a long time, actually listen. The noise was never the problem. The silence you were afraid of, that was always the answer. Chapter 2. Trapped inside your own mind. What if the most dangerous place you've ever been was never out there in the world? What if it was in here, inside your own head? And the scariest part? You can't leave. You can't book a flight out. You can't close the door and walk away. Because wherever you go, it comes with you. Yeah, that's what we're talking about today. And I need you to really stay with me on this one, because what I'm about to say is going to feel uncomfortably close to home. There's a kind of prison that has no walls, no bars, no locks, no guards standing outside. But it's real, it's suffocating, and millions of people are living inside it right now without even realizing it. It's the prison of your own mind, and the cruelest thing about it, you built it yourself. Brick by brick, thought by thought, year by year, without even knowing you were doing it. Every time you told yourself you weren't good enough, every time you replayed a painful memory instead of letting it go, every time you imagined the worst possible outcome before anything even happened, that was you, adding another brick. And now, you're standing inside something you built, wondering why you feel so trapped. Let me paint you a picture. You're sitting in your room. Everything is fine on the outside. Nothing is technically wrong. You have a roof over your head, people who care about you, things to look forward to. But inside it feels like you're drowning in slow motion. There's this heavy fog sitting on your chest, This constant background noise that never really goes away. This feeling like something is wrong, but you can't name it, can't point to it, can't explain it to anyone without sounding dramatic. So you say nothing, you smile, you say you're fine, and the walls get a little thicker. Here's what psychology tells us about this. The human mind has a default mode. Scientists actually call it the default mode network. It's the part of your brain that activates when you're not doing anything specific, when you're just existing. And do you know what it does during that time? It wanders, it drifts, it goes to the past and picks at old wounds. It goes to the future and builds disasters that haven't happened yet. It compares you to other people. It questions your worth. It runs simulations of everything that could go wrong. This is your brain's natural resting state. Not peace, not quiet, not stillness, wandering, worrying, wandering. And research has actually shown something deeply uncomfortable. People are less happy when their minds are wandering than when they're focused on almost any task, even a boring one. That means your own mind in its natural state is working against your happiness. Let that land for a second. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Most of us don't just have a wandering mind, we have a cruel one. Think about the way you talk to yourself when you make a mistake. Would you ever say those things to a friend? To someone you love? Of course not. You'd be kind. You'd be understanding. You'd say, "It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. You'll do better next time." But to yourself, you say things that would break someone else's heart. You call yourself stupid, worthless, pathetic. You drag yourself through the same mistake over and over again like it's some kind of punishment you deserve. Psychologists call this self-directed cruelty, and it's one of the most common forms of psychological suffering that almost nobody talks about. Because it's silent, because it happens in your head, because no one can see the bruises it leaves. But they're real, and they go deep. And here's the part that really gets me. The more self-aware you are, sometimes, the worse it gets. Because self-awareness without self-compassion is just self-torture with better vocabulary. You start to see your patterns. You start to understand why you do the things you do. But instead of using that understanding to heal, you use it to judge yourself even harder. I know I do this. I know exactly why I do it. And I still can't stop. What is wrong with me? And around it goes. The trap gets more sophisticated, more philosophical, more exhausting. Because now you're not just suffering, you're watching yourself suffer and criticizing yourself for not suffering better. Let me tell you about something called rumination. It's not the same as thinking. It feels like thinking. It looks like thinking, but it's something much darker. Rumination is when your mind gets stuck on something painful and just keeps chewing on it over and over, not to find a solution, not to learn something, just to feel it again and again and again. A conversation that went wrong, a decision you regret, a moment you wish you could take back. Your mind replays it, slightly different each time, sometimes worse. Sometimes you imagine what you should have said, what you could have done, how things might have been different. And none of it changes anything. None of it helps. But you can't stop. That's rumination, and research shows it's one of the single biggest predictors of depression and anxiety. Not what happened to you, but how long your mind stays stuck on what happened to you. The event ends, but inside your head, it never really does. And you know what makes it worse? The more you try to stop thinking about something, the more you think about it. Psychologists call this the ironic process theory. Daniel Wegner, a Harvard psychologist, did a famous experiment. He told people one simple thing: don't think about a white bear. And immediately, all they could think about was the white bear. Your mind doesn't process negatives well. When you say, don't think about this,
Your brain has to think about it first, just to know what to avoid. So every time you lie in bed telling yourself to stop overthinking, you're accidentally giving your mind a roadmap straight back to the very thing you're trying to escape. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're just caught in one of the cruelest design flaws of the human mind. There's a concept in philosophy called the observer and the observed. The idea that there's a part of you that watches your own thoughts, that stands slightly apart from them, that can notice when the mind is being unkind or irrational or stuck. Most people never discover this part of themselves. They don't realize they are not their thoughts. They experience a thought and immediately become it. The thought says, "You're a failure," and they don't question it. They just become a failure in that moment, in that feeling. But here's the truth that changes everything. You are not your thoughts. You are the one noticing them. The thought passes through you like weather passes through the sky. The sky doesn't become the storm. It just holds it for a while. And then the storm moves on. You are the sky, not the storm. Viktor Frankl survived the Holocaust. He lost almost everything. And in the darkest conditions imaginable, he discovered something that no one could take from him. The space between stimulus and response, between what happens to you and how you react to it. There is a gap, a tiny, almost invisible gap. And in that gap lives your freedom. Not freedom from your thoughts, not freedom from your pain, but freedom in how you relate to them. That's the shift. That's the door out of the prison. Not escaping your mind, but changing your relationship with it. Because here's what nobody tells you about being trapped inside your own head. The exit was never on the outside. You were never going to find it in a new city, a new relationship, a new job, a new version of your life. You were never going to scroll your way out of it, or drink your way out, or stay busy enough that it finally left you alone. It followed you, because it lives in you, and the only way through it is actually through it. Not around it, not over it, not pretending it's not there, through it. So what does that actually look like? It starts with something so simple it almost sounds stupid. You notice. Instead of being inside the thought, you take one tiny step back and you notice it. There's that voice again, the one that says, "I'm not enough. I see you. I hear you. But I'm not going to follow you today." That's it. That's the beginning. Not fixing, not solving, not arguing with the thought or trying to replace it with something positive. Just noticing. Just creating that tiny gap between you and the story your mind is telling. Because the moment you can observe a thought without becoming it, its power over you begins to shrink. And slowly, over time, something starts to change. The mind doesn't get quieter necessarily, but you get stronger. You start to recognize the patterns, the triggers, the specific flavors of cruelty your inner voice likes to use, and you start to respond differently, not with more judgment, not with "why am I still like this?" but with something that feels almost radical after a lifetime of self-criticism. Gentleness. The same gentleness you would offer a friend who was struggling, the same patience you would give to someone you love. You start to offer that to yourself. And I know that sounds soft. I know it might even sound uncomfortable if you spent years believing that being hard on yourself is what keeps you going. But the research is clear. Self-compassion doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you complacent. It actually makes you more resilient, more motivated, more able to face hard things without falling apart. Because you're not fighting yourself anymore, and that frees up an enormous amount of energy. The most mentally free people I've ever come across, they're not the ones who have it all figured out. They're not the ones with the quietest minds or the most perfect thoughts. They're the ones who stopped being at war with themselves. They made peace with the noise. They learned to hold their own pain without drowning in it. They discovered that they could be deeply profoundly human, messy and uncertain and afraid, and still be okay, still be worthy, still be enough. So if you're sitting there right now feeling trapped, feeling like your own mind is the most exhausting place you've ever lived, I want you to hear this. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not a problem that needs to be solved. You are a human being who got lost inside their own head, and that happens to almost everyone. And there is a way back. Not out, back. Back to yourself. The version of you that exists underneath all the noise, underneath all the self-criticism and the fear and the endless overthinking. That version is still there, quiet, patient, waiting. The prison was never real. The walls were made of thoughts, and thoughts can change. So the next time your mind turns against you, don't run, don't fight, don't hate yourself for being human. Just take one breath, one tiny step back, and remember, you are not trapped inside your mind. You are so much bigger than it. Chapter 3. When thinking becomes a prison. What if I told you that the thing hurting you the most right now isn't a person, isn't a situation, isn't even something you can point to? It's your own mind. And the terrifying part? You can't escape it. You can't leave it behind. You can't take a break from it, because it goes everywhere you go. It wakes up when you wake up. It follows you into every room, every relationship, every quiet moment. And I need you to really stay with this one, because this might be the most honest conversation you've had in a long time. There's a kind of suffering that leaves no visible marks, no bruises, no scars, nothing anyone else can see. But it's real, it's exhausting, and it's happening inside the minds of millions of people right now, while they smile and say they're fine. It's the suffering that comes from thinking too much, feeling too deeply, and being completely, hopelessly trapped inside the one place you can never leave, your own head. And here's what nobody tells you about that kind of suffering. It doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need something bad to happen. It doesn't wait for a crisis or a tragedy. It just starts. Out of nowhere, in the middle of a perfectly normal day, and suddenly you're drowning in thoughts that make no sense, feelings you can't name, and a heaviness that sits on your chest like something physical. And the worst part? You did nothing wrong. You didn't ask for this. You didn't choose it. But here you are anyway. Let me tell you something that science has actually proven. Something that stopped me when I first read it. Harvard psychologists Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert conducted a major study. They tracked thousands of people across their daily lives, and what they found was genuinely disturbing. People spend nearly 47% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they're actually doing. Almost half their lives, mentally somewhere else entirely. And that's not the disturbing part yet. The research found that mind wandering was generally the cause, not the consequence, of unhappiness. Let that sink in. Your mind drifts away from the present moment, and that drifting makes you unhappy, not the other way around. You're not unhappy because bad things happened. You're unhappy because your mind won't stay still, because it keeps going back, keeps going forward, keeps anywhere except right here, right now. As Killingsworth and Gilbert wrote, a human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. That's not philosophy. That's science, published in one of the most respected journals in the world. But why does this happen? Why can't we just stop? Here's where neuroscience comes in, and it's fascinating and deeply unsettling at the same time. Your brain has something called the default mode network. Scientists discovered it by accident. They were doing brain scans, expecting the brain to go quiet when people weren't doing anything specific. Instead, it lit up. The default mode network is a system of connected brain areas that show increased activity when a person is not focused on what is happening around them. It's especially active during introspection, daydreaming, thinking about the past or the future. In other words, when you're doing nothing, your brain is doing everything. When you're not actively solving a problem or engaging with the outside world, your brain doesn't go quiet. It switches modes, and the default mode network doesn't know when to stop. Left unchecked, it loops, it replays, it narrates, it predicts worst-case scenarios with almost theatrical intensity. That's not a flaw in you. That's a feature of the human brain. A feature that was incredibly useful when we lived in dangerous environments and needed to constantly anticipate threats. But in the modern world, it becomes a trap, a loop with no exit. A machine that keeps running even when there's nothing left to process. Research shows that individuals prone to overthinking exhibit what scientists call hyperconnectivity in the default mode network. The brain essentially becomes a neurological cage, a system that was built for survival, turned against the person it was supposed to protect. And then there's rumination. This is where it gets really dark. Rumination in psychology refers to the repetitive thinking process where individuals continuously focus on negative experiences or worries without reaching a resolution. The term actually comes from the Latin word for the way certain animals digest food in stages, a cyclical process, chewing the same thing over and over. That's what your mind does. It takes a painful memory, a regret, a mistake, a conversation that went wrong, and it chews on it again and again and again, not to solve anything, not to find a lesson, just to feel it one more time and one more time after that. A 2020 study published in Behavior Research and Therapy found that rumination heightens vulnerability to anxiety, depression, insomnia, and impulsive behaviors. It worsens the body's stress responses. It actually causes physical inflammation inside your body. Your thoughts are hurting you physically. Let that land for a moment. Research from the University of Liverpool found that dwelling on negative events is the single biggest predictor of depression and anxiety. Not your circumstances, not your history, not even what actually happened to you. How long your mind stays stuck on what happened to you. The event ends, the thought doesn't. And here's the part that makes it even more disturbing. The more intelligent you are, sometimes, the worse it gets. Because a sharp mind doesn't just ruminate, it ruminates with precision. It builds complete arguments for why you're not enough. It constructs detailed simulations of everything that could go wrong. It anticipates pain so vividly that your body responds as if the pain is already happening. Your cortisol spikes, your chest tightens, your breathing changes, your body goes into stress response. Over something that only exists inside your head. Over a thought. That's how real this is. That's how powerful the prison is. And the cruelest irony of all? Research has shown that rumination leads to poor problem solving, biased information processing, and impaired ability to function in daily life. The very act of thinking too hard about your problems actually makes you less capable of solving them. You think harder trying to find a way out. And the harder you think, the deeper in you go. There's also something called brooding, and it's different from just overthinking. Brooding is a one-sided internal conversation where a person replays negative events and criticizes themselves. It narrows attention onto bad feelings and imagined failures, and research shows that brooding predicts worse mood over time and higher risk of serious mental health struggles, much more so than simply reflecting on a problem. Think about how you talk to yourself when you make a mistake. Really think about it. Would you ever say those things to someone you love? someone who came to you broken and hurting. No, you would be gentle, you would be patient, you would say it's okay, you'd say everyone makes mistakes, you'd say you still believe in them. But to yourself, you say things that would destroy another person. You call yourself stupid, weak, pathetic. You drag yourself through the same moment over and over like it's some punishment you've decided you deserve. And nobody sees it. Nobody knows it's happening because it's all inside, silent, invisible. But the damage is real. And now let's talk about the thing that makes all of this so frustratingly difficult to escape. The more you try to stop a thought, the stronger it gets. This isn't a theory. This is proven psychology. Harvard psychologist Daniel Wegner ran a now famous experiment. He gave people one simple instruction: don't think about a white bear. And immediately, all they could think about was the white bear. Wegner called this the ironic process theory. When you try to suppress a thought, your brain has to actively hold that thought in mind just to monitor whether you're thinking it. So every time you lie awake telling yourself to stop overthinking, stop worrying, stop replaying that conversation, you're actually handing your mind a direct path back to the very thing you're trying to escape. You're not losing a battle against your thoughts, you're fighting the wrong battle entirely. So what actually happens to a person who lives inside this prison for years? Research published in leading psychiatric journals shows that chronic rumination is involved in the development and maintenance of a broad range of serious conditions, including depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, insomnia, eating disorders, and substance use disorders. It doesn't stay in the mind. It spreads. It changes how you see yourself, how you experience trust, love, hope. It makes the world feel smaller, darker, more threatening than it actually is. And the person living inside that prison starts to forget what it felt like to be free. They forget what it felt like to just exist, without the noise, without the weight. They forget that there was ever a version of themselves that wasn't exhausted. But here's the shift, and this is the part I need you to really hear. The prison was built by thinking, and it can only be escaped by understanding how thinking actually works. Not by thinking harder, not by figuring out the perfect solution, not by analyzing your way to peace, but by changing your relationship with your own thoughts. There's a concept that's been understood by ancient philosophies and confirmed by modern psychology. The idea that you are not your thoughts. You are the one noticing them. There's a part of you that can observe a thought without becoming it, that can watch the spiral begin and choose not to follow it down. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, wrote about finding freedom even in the most unimaginable conditions. He called it the space between stimulus and response, between what happens and how you react. In that space lives choice. In that space lives freedom. And mindfulness, which gets dismissed as soft and trendy, is actually one of the most scientifically supported tools for breaking the rumination cycle. Research has found that mindfulness-based stress reduction is consistently correlated with lower levels of rumination across multiple studies. Not because mindfulness makes the thoughts disappear, but because it trains you to observe them without being consumed by them. It teaches you that a thought is just a thought, not a truth, not a command, not a verdict on who you are, just a thought. And thoughts pass, like clouds through a sky, like weather through a season. The sky doesn't become the storm, it holds the storm for a while, and then the storm moves on. You are the sky. And this is where something shifts, slowly, quietly, but permanently. You stop treating your mind like an enemy to be defeated, and you start treating it like something more honest. A mind under pressure, a mind that learned to protect you by anticipating danger, a mind that got stuck in a pattern it was never meant to stay in forever. You bring the same gentleness to yourself that you would bring to someone you love who was struggling, not because you're giving up, not because you're weak, but because self-compassion, real, honest self-compassion, is the only thing that actually interrupts the cycle. Research confirms that while we can't change a person's history or their life experiences, it is genuinely possible to help a person change the way they think. And that change in thinking can reduce distress significantly. The prison is real, but the door was never locked. So if you're somewhere right now, deep inside your own head, exhausted from the noise, tired from the loops, worn down from a war you've been fighting alone inside yourself, I want you to hear this. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not a person who thinks too hard because something is wrong with you. You are a human being with a powerful, sensitive mind that got caught in a loop it didn't know how to break. And loops can be broken, not by force, not by willpower alone, but by understanding, by patience, by finally stopping the war with yourself and choosing, one moment at a time, to simply observe instead of obey. The prison of thinking was never made of steel. It was made of repetition, of habit, of a mind that didn't know it had the option to stop. And now you know. So the next time the loop starts, the next time the voice gets loud, the next time the spiral begins at 2 a.m., don't fight it, don't feed it, don't follow it. Just notice it. And remember, you are not the thought. You are the one who can watch it pass. And that is the beginning of freedom. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Control. Can I be honest with you about something? There's this thing we all do, every single one of us, and we never talk about it. We spend our entire lives trying to control things, what people think of us, how situations turn out, whether the people we love stay. And we get really good at it. We make plans, we prepare for every possible outcome, we replay conversations before they happen, we rehearse, we overthink, we hold on so tight that our knuckles go white, and we call it being responsible, being careful, being smart. But here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Most of it was never in our hands to begin with. I remember this feeling, maybe you know it too. That feeling when everything in your life feels uncertain, when you don't know how something is going to turn out. And instead of sitting with that uncertainty, you start doing things, anything, just to feel like you have some grip on what's happening. You check your phone obsessively, you make lists, you replay the conversation 14 times trying to figure out what they meant by that one thing they said. You're not doing it because it helps. You're doing it because the alternative, sitting still in the middle of the unknown, feels absolutely unbearable. And that's the honest truth about control. It's not really about controlling the situation, it's about managing the fear of what happens if you can't. Think about the last time something didn't go the way you planned. Not a small thing, something that actually mattered. A relationship that ended when you thought it was finally going somewhere. A job you wanted so badly and didn't get. A version of your life you had mapped out perfectly in your head that just quietly fell apart. What did that feel like? Not just the sadness, not just the disappointment. That specific feeling of, what just happened? I did everything right. I planned. I was careful. I tried so hard. How did it still go wrong? That feeling right there, that disorientation, that quiet panic underneath the surface, that is what happens when the illusion breaks, when reality reminds you, firmly and without apology, that it was never really yours to control. Here's something psychology has understood for a long time. Human beings have what researchers call the illusion of control. It was studied deeply by psychologist Ellen Langer at Harvard in the 1970s, and what she found was both fascinating and a little disturbing. People consistently behave as if they can influence outcomes that are entirely random. She did a simple experiment with lottery tickets. When people chose their own ticket, they were far less willing to trade it for a ticket with better odds, even though the outcome was completely random, even though choosing your own ticket changed absolutely nothing about your chances. The act of choosing made them feel like they had some kind of power over the result. We do this everywhere. We knock on wood. We wear the lucky shirt on the day of the interview. We sit in the same spot we were sitting when something good happened last time. And we don't even notice we're doing it. Because the feeling of control, even a completely false feeling of control, calms something deep inside us. It quiets the anxiety. It makes the uncertainty feel smaller. And that's the trap. Because we start organizing our entire lives around maintaining that feeling, even when the feeling has nothing to do with reality. But let's go deeper, because this is where it gets really personal. The need for control doesn't come from nowhere. Most of the time, it comes from a time when things felt out of control and nobody was there to make it okay. Maybe it was childhood, a home where things were unpredictable, where you never quite knew what mood the room was going to be in. So you learned to read every signal, to stay one step ahead, to manage everyone and everything around you just to feel safe. Maybe it was a relationship, someone who made you feel like the ground could shift at any moment. So you started trying to control every variable, every conversation, every possible outcome, just to stop the floor from disappearing beneath you. Or maybe nothing dramatic happened at all. Maybe it was just life, just the slow accumulation of moments where things didn't go the way you hoped. And somewhere along the way, your brain quietly decided, if I just try hard enough to control this, I can stop it from hurting again. And that decision made complete sense at the time. It was your mind trying to protect you. But somewhere between then and now, the protection became a prison. Because here's what the need for control actually costs you. It costs you presence. When you're constantly trying to manage every outcome, you're never actually here. You're always 3 steps ahead, planning, preparing, running scenarios, trying to stay one move ahead of a future that hasn't happened yet. And life? The actual texture of it, the small, beautiful, ordinary moments of it, passes by while you're busy trying to protect yourself from it. You're at dinner with someone you love, but you're not really there. You're somewhere in your head, monitoring, evaluating, managing. You're in a moment that could be good, but you can't quite let yourself feel it. Because feeling it means trusting it, and trusting it means it could be taken away. So you hold back, just a little, just enough to feel like you won't be completely destroyed if it falls apart. And that holding back, that small, constant, invisible withholding, is the real cost of the illusion. You are so afraid of losing something beautiful that you never fully let yourself have it. The Stoics understood something about this that I keep coming back to. Marcus Aurelius, who was dealing with wars and plagues and the weight of an entire empire, wrote something quietly devastating in his private journal. He said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength, not control. Power over your mind." There's a difference that matters enormously. Epictetus, who had been an actual slave, divided the world into 2 things: things within our control and things outside it. Within our control, our thoughts, our choices, how we respond. Outside our control, everything else. Other people, outcomes, time, loss. And he said that almost all human suffering comes from confusing these 2 categories. from spending our energy trying to control the things we fundamentally cannot, while neglecting the only thing we actually can. This wasn't philosophy for philosophy's sake. This was a practical map for surviving a world that doesn't bend to our wishes, a world that never did and never will. And here's what modern psychology confirms. Researchers have found that people who have a high need for control actually experience more anxiety, not less. Because the gap between what they're trying to control and what they actually can control is enormous. And maintaining that gap, trying to bridge it constantly, is exhausting. It's like trying to hold water in your fists. The tighter you squeeze, the more slips through, and you're left standing there, hands shaking, exhausted, wondering why it keeps happening. There's a moment, and I think you felt this, where something you were desperately trying to hold together just lets go. Despite everything, despite all your planning and preparing and trying so hard, it just ends, or changes, or becomes something you didn't choose. And in that moment, after the first wave of pain and panic, something else happens. Something that's hard to describe until you've felt it. A kind of quiet. Not the quiet of giving up, not numbness, not defeat, but the quiet that comes when you finally stop fighting something that was always bigger than you. When you finally put down the weight you were never supposed to be carrying alone. That quiet is not weakness. That quiet is what surrender actually feels like when it's honest. And it is one of the most profound forms of relief a human being can experience. Because letting go of control doesn't mean letting go of effort. This is the part I really want you to understand, because I think it gets misunderstood all the time. Accepting that you can't control outcomes doesn't mean you stop showing up, doesn't mean you stop caring, doesn't mean you become passive and just let life happen to you. It means you shift where you put your energy. Instead of trying to control how someone feels about you, you focus on being honest, being present, being real. Instead of trying to guarantee a specific outcome, you focus on doing the work with integrity and releasing the result. Instead of trying to hold every piece of your life in place through sheer force of will, you do what you can with what you have. And then you breathe. You stop gripping so hard. And weirdly, unexpectedly, things don't fall apart more. Sometimes they actually settle into something more real, more honest, more solid than anything you could have arranged, because you stopped forcing them into the shape you thought they needed to be, and let them find their own shape instead. I think the most honest thing I can say about control is this: the version of life you've been trying so hard to hold together, the perfectly managed, carefully arranged, no surprises version, it was never really available. Not to you, not to anyone. Life has always been uncertain. People have always been unpredictable. Outcomes have always been partially outside our hands. That's not a flaw in the design. That's the design. And the sooner we stop fighting it, the sooner we stop spending our precious, limited, unrepeatable days trying to control what was never ours to control, the sooner we get to actually live them. So if you're someone who holds on tight, who plans everything, who lies awake running scenarios, who finds uncertainty almost physically painful, this is not a criticism of you. Please hear that. It's an acknowledgement of how hard you've been working, how much energy you've poured into trying to keep everything safe, and a gentle suggestion that maybe, just maybe, you can put some of that down now. Not all of it, not forever, just a little. Just enough to breathe, just enough to be here, in this moment, without already being 10 steps ahead, trying to manage what comes next. You were never in control. And somehow, that's the most freeing thing you'll ever know. Because if you were never in control, then you also were never responsible for every outcome that didn't go the way you hoped. You were just a person, doing your best, in a world that moves in ways no one can fully predict. And that person, that trying, hoping, exhausted, still showing up person, deserves a little more grace from the world, but especially from themselves. The illusion of control kept you safe for a while, but you don't need it anymore. What you need now is something harder and more honest: trust. Not in a perfect plan, not in a guaranteed outcome. Just trust that you can handle what comes, that you always have, and that you always will. Chapter 5. The fear you refuse to face. The fear there's something living inside you right now. You know it's there. You've always known. But every single day, you find a reason not to look at it. You stay busy. You stay distracted. You stay in motion. Because the moment you slow down, the moment things get quiet, it's right there, waiting. That one fear you've never let yourself fully face. And today, we're going to talk about it. Not to scare you, but because it's already scaring you every single day, whether you look at it or not. Here's the thing about fear that nobody really says clearly. Fear doesn't need you to face it to ruin your life. It just needs you to keep running. And most of us have been running for years. We just got so good at it that we started calling it living. We built routines around our fears. We made choices based on them. We stayed in jobs that felt safe. We stayed out of relationships that felt risky. We said no to things we actually wanted because somewhere underneath, fear made the decision before we even had a chance to think. And we told ourselves it was wisdom, caution, being realistic. But if you're being honest, really honest, you know the difference between wisdom and avoidance. Wisdom considers the options. Avoidance doesn't let you see them. Let's talk about what actually happens in your brain when you're afraid. Deep inside your brain sits a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. And this thing is ancient, way older than language, way older than logic. The amygdala is the part of the brain that processes emotions like fear. It's also where emotional memories are formed and where threatening situations get sorted from non-threatening ones. And here's the thing about your amygdala. It doesn't think. It doesn't reason. It doesn't sit and weigh your options carefully. It just reacts. The moment it senses something that reminds it of past pain, something that pattern matches to old hurt, it fires. It sends a signal that floods your entire body with stress hormones. Your heart rate climbs, your muscles tense, your breathing gets shallow. And all of this happens in milliseconds before your conscious mind even knows what's going on. The brain fear response begins the instant a person perceives danger, whether that danger is real or imagined. Real or imagined. Your brain genuinely doesn't know the difference. So when you think about having that difficult conversation, or putting your work out into the world where people can judge it, or telling someone how you really feel, your body responds as if a lion is standing in front of you. That's not dramatic. That's biology. But here's where it gets disturbing. In people who carry chronic anxiety, the balance between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex gets disrupted. The amygdala becomes overactive, while the prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part of your brain, struggles to exert control. This leads to persistent worry, persistent avoidance, and persistent fear. In other words, the more you avoid something, the more your amygdala treats it as a confirmed threat. Every time you walk away from the thing you fear, your brain logs it. We ran from that. It must have been dangerous. We should run faster next time. The fear doesn't shrink. It gets bigger. It gets more organized. It builds a stronger case for itself every single time you let it win. And you didn't know you were doing this. You thought you were protecting yourself, but you were actually feeding it. Psychologists have known for decades that avoidance maintains irrational fears by removing learning opportunities. The very act of avoiding something prevents you from discovering that the danger you imagined was never really there. This is the most brutal irony of fear. The only evidence that would set you free is the experience of surviving what you avoided. But because you keep avoiding it, you never get that evidence. So the fear stays, unchallenged, growing quietly in the dark, and you build your life around the gap it leaves. A smaller life, a carefully arranged life, a life with invisible walls you've built so gradually you forgot you were building them. Let me ask you something. What is the fear you never talk about? Not the surface stuff, not the fear of spiders or flying or embarrassing yourself in public. The deeper one, the one that lives underneath all the other excuses. Is it the fear of being truly seen? That if someone got close enough to see the real, unedited version of you, they would leave? Is it the fear of failure, not the ordinary kind, but the specific terror that maybe you are genuinely not capable of the life you want? That maybe the gap between who you are and who you need to be is just too wide? Is it the fear of loss, that the moment you let yourself love something completely, it will be taken? So you love at a slight distance, just enough to feel connected, not enough to be destroyed. Or is it the fear of yourself, of what you might discover if you got quiet enough to actually listen? These are the fears nobody posts about, nobody casually brings up over coffee, but they are the fears that shape everything. Research consistently shows that avoidance is linked to heightened anxiety, reduced resilience, and lower emotional regulation. You feel relief in the short term, but guilt, shame, and regret come later. This is the cruel math of avoidance: short-term relief, long-term cost. Every time you avoid the thing that scares you, you get a hit of relief. Your nervous system calms down. The threat is gone. You feel okay again. And your brain remembers that. Avoidance worked. Avoidance made the bad feelings stop. Do it again. So the next time fear shows up, avoidance is the first option your brain reaches for, because it learned, because it was rewarded. But what your brain didn't record was the cost, the opportunity that didn't happen, the conversation that never got had, the version of your life that stayed locked behind the door you refused to open. That cost doesn't show up all at once. It shows up slowly, in the quiet accumulation of chances not taken, dreams deferred, years that passed while you were busy being safe. There's a concept in philosophy that I keep thinking about in relation to this. Kierkegaard wrote about what he called the dizziness of freedom, the idea that genuine freedom, real choice, real possibility, is not comfortable. It's terrifying, because when everything is genuinely open to you, when you could choose any direction, the weight of that possibility is almost unbearable. So we close doors, not because we have to, but because having fewer options feels less frightening than having all of them. We avoid the fear of choosing by eliminating choices. We make our world smaller so we can feel more in control of what's left. And we call it being careful, being responsible, being realistic. But what we're really doing is making a trade. Trading the discomfort of fear for the comfort of a smaller life. And the really disturbing part, excessive avoidance is consistently associated with maintaining anxiety symptoms and actively interferes with the natural process by which fear diminishes on its own. Your fear was always meant to be temporary. The original design was this: encounter threat, feel fear, respond, learn, move on. But avoidance breaks that cycle. It keeps you stuck at encounter threat, feel fear forever. Because without facing it, without going through it, you never reach the learn part. You never discover what you're actually capable of. You never find out that you could have survived it. And that not knowing becomes its own kind of prison. Here's what the science of exposure therapy has shown us, and I want you to really hear this. People with anxiety disorders consistently underestimate their own ability to cope with fear. But when they face the feared situation and successfully tolerate it, without avoiding, without escaping, they begin to realize they are more capable and resilient than they had ever imagined. More capable than they ever imagined. All those years of avoiding, all that energy spent building walls and finding detours and keeping the fear at arm's length, and on the other side of it was just the discovery that they could handle it. That they always could. That the fear was a gatekeeper with no actual power. Just the power you gave it by never calling its bluff. I want to say something that might be uncomfortable. The fear you're carrying right now, the one you've been refusing to face, it has cost you something real. Relationships that could have gone deeper if you'd been willing to be vulnerable. Work you could have shared with the world if you'd been willing to risk rejection. Conversations that could have changed everything if you'd just been willing to start them. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because the accounting is real, and somewhere inside you, you already know it. You felt it. In those moments at 2 a.m. when you let yourself think about the life you might have lived if fear hadn't been making so many decisions. So what do you actually do with this? Because I'm not going to tell you to just be brave. That's not useful. That's not honest. Real fear doesn't respond to being told to man up or push through. What works is something slower and more honest. You start small. You pick the smallest version of the thing you're afraid of, not the whole monster, just its shadow. And you stay with it for a minute, for 5 minutes. You don't run, you just breathe and notice that you're still here. Gradual, supported exposure to feared thoughts or feelings can genuinely rewire your brain's fear response. Tiny, consistent steps create lasting change, not dramatic confrontations, not forcing yourself through agony in one moment. Just small, repeated acts of not running, and slowly, over time, something shifts in your nervous system. Your brain starts to update its records. We stayed with this. We survived. Maybe it's not as dangerous as we thought. That's how fear actually changes. Not through willpower, through repeated, gentle evidence. And here's the thing about finally facing something you've been running from for a long time. There's grief in it. Real grief. For all the time spent on the wrong side of the door. For all the ways fear shaped your choices before you understood what was happening. Let that grief be real. Don't skip past it. But then, underneath it, there's something else. A kind of relief so deep, it almost doesn't have a name. The relief of stopping the performance, of no longer spending energy maintaining the avoidance, of finally turning around and looking the thing in the eye. It's not that the fear disappears completely. It's that you realize, for the first time, that you are bigger than it. You were always bigger than it. The fear you've been refusing to face isn't waiting to destroy you. It's waiting to introduce you to a version of yourself you've never met. The one who went through the thing and survived. The one who found out finally what they were actually made of. That version has been standing on the other side of your fear this whole time, waiting, patiently, for you to stop running long enough to arrive. You don't have to face it all today. You just have to stop pretending it isn't there. That's enough. That's where it begins. Chapter 6. Loss between past and future. You ever catch yourself staring at nothing, heart pounding, and realize you haven't actually been here for hours? Not really. Your body's moving through the day, sure, but your mind, it's somewhere else, trapped, split between what already happened and what might happen next. And the scariest part? You don't even notice how much life is sliding right past you while you're gone. Hey, I know this feeling. You've been there too. We all have. That quiet, heavy ache that creeps in when the room gets too still, when you're brushing your teeth or driving home or sitting with friends, and suddenly you're not. You're replaying that conversation from last year where you said the wrong thing, or you're 5 steps ahead, imagining how everything could fall apart if you mess up tomorrow. The present moment, it's just empty. A blank space you're barely touching, and the longer it goes on, the more disturbing it gets. Because this isn't just overthinking. This is your mind building walls around you. Real walls. The kind that lock you out of your own life. Psychologists have tracked this for years now. When you keep chewing on the past, those regrets, those what-ifs, those old wounds, you're not reflecting. You're ruminating. And studies show it straight up feeds depression. It pulls up more negative memories, makes today look darker, and leaves you hopeless about anything ahead. It's a loop. The more you replay the past, the worse you feel. And the worse you feel, the deeper you sink into the past. Then there's the future side, the worry, the endless what-if movie your brain runs on repeat. What if I fail? What if they leave? What if everything I've built just crumbles? That future tripping? It's anxiety's favorite fuel. Research backs it up. People who live like this end up with higher rates of both anxiety and depression. Your body stays in fight or flight even when there's no real danger. Sleep gets wrecked. Decisions feel impossible. You start avoiding anything that might poke at those fears, which just makes the fears louder. It's like your brain is stuck in 2 different prisons at once. One behind you, one in front of you. And the door to right now, it's bolted shut. Think about it for a second. How many sunsets have you missed because you were busy reliving yesterday's fight? How many laughs with someone you love turned into background noise while your mind was already 10 years ahead, stressing about money or health or failure? How many times have you said, "I'm fine," when inside you were miles away, replaying old pain or scripting disasters that haven't even happened? This is the part that hits hard. You're not just distracted, you're disappearing, bit by bit. The version of you that could actually feel joy today, it's fading. Because real life only happens in the present. The past is gone, the future isn't here yet, but you're handing over every single second to ghosts and shadows. And the research is clear. When you're lost like this, your mind starts to believe the worst. Negative patterns get wired in deeper. Hope shrinks. Even your body feels it. Tension, exhaustion, that constant low-level dread that never quite leaves. Some nights it gets darker. You lie there at 3 a.m., eyes burning, heart racing, and it hits you. All those years, all those moments you can't get back, the chances you didn't take because you were too busy worrying, the connections that slipped away while you were mentally somewhere else, the dreams you kept putting off until things settle down. But things never settle. Not when you're split like this. You start to wonder, am I even living? Or am I just waiting? Waiting for the past to stop hurting. Waiting for the future to finally feel safe. Waiting while life keeps moving without you. That's the breaking point. That cold, sickening wave when you realize you've been a ghost in your own story, watching from the sidelines, half there, half alive. And the fear that creeps in then, it's not loud, it's quiet. It's the terrifying thought that if you don't snap out of this, one day you'll look back and the whole thing will be over, and you'll have missed it, all of it. But here's where it turns. Not because some magic fix appears, but because the truth is simpler and way more intense than we want to admit. The only place anything real ever happens is right now. This breath, this heartbeat, this exact second. The past can't touch you anymore. The future isn't written yet, but this moment, it's yours, and your mind has been stealing it from you. Psychologists call the way out present moment awareness. It's not some fluffy idea. It's backed by real science. When people start training their brains to come back to now through small, honest practices, the rumination slows, the worry loses its grip, anxiety drops, depression symptoms ease, you sleep better, you feel more. You actually start living instead of just surviving between two time zones that don't exist. It doesn't happen overnight, and it won't feel comfortable at first, because facing the present means facing everything you've been avoiding, the feelings you've been running from, the truth that's been sitting there while you hid in yesterday or tomorrow. You might feel exposed, raw, like your chest is cracking open. That's the disturbance. That's the part that scares people off, but it's also the only way through. Start small, right now. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice the air moving in and out of your lungs. Hear the sounds around you without labeling them. When your mind drifts back to that old regret or that scary what if, don't fight it, just notice it. Say thinking quietly to yourself, and gently come back, again and again. It's not about emptying your head. It's about stopping the war with time. Do it while you're eating, while you're walking, while you're talking to someone you care about. Put the phone down. Look them in the eyes. Really see them. Feel what's happening between you right now. That's where life is. That's where the color comes back. The more you do this, the more your brain rewires. The loops get weaker. The peace gets louder. You start to trust that whatever the past threw at you, you survived it. And whatever the future holds, you'll meet it when it gets here. But right now, you're free. That's the shift. Not ignoring the past or pretending the future doesn't matter, but refusing to let them steal today anymore. You start showing up fully for the small things, the coffee, the conversation, the quiet moment alone. And suddenly, life doesn't feel like it's passing you by. It feels like it's happening to you, with you, inside you. The weight lifts, not all at once, but enough. Enough to breathe deeper, enough to laugh easier, enough to feel excited about what's possible instead of terrified. Because here's the raw truth. You only get one shot at this. One wild, messy, beautiful life. And every second you spend lost between past and future is a second you can never take back. The disturbing part is knowing that, really knowing it, feeling it in your bones. But the beautiful part, you can stop right now. You can choose to come home to this moment, to this version of you that's still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling everything deeply. The good, the hard, the real. So if you're hearing this and something inside you is stirring, that's not random. That's the part of you that's tired of being split in two, tired of watching life from the outside. Come back. Come back to the only place anything ever changes. Come back to now. Because the life you've been waiting for, it's not in the past. It's not hiding in some perfect future. It's right here, waiting for you to finally show up. And when you do, everything starts to feel different. Heavier in the best way. More alive, more yours. Don't let another day slip away. You're not lost anymore. You're here.
Chapter 7. The moment everything breaks. There is a moment. You don't see it coming. You can't plan for it. You can't negotiate with it. It just arrives. One ordinary day, maybe a Tuesday, maybe in the middle of something completely normal, standing in the shower, sitting in traffic, lying in bed staring at a ceiling that says nothing back. and something inside you just gives. Not dramatically, not like in the movies, not with a soundtrack, just quietly. Like a thread pulled too tight for too long, finally snapping. And that's the moment everything breaks. I want to talk to you about that moment today. Not to scare you, not to make it heavier than it already is, but because I think a lot of people have lived through this moment and never had anyone sit with them and say, I know what that was. I know what happened to you. And I want you to understand it, because understanding it changes everything about how you survive it. Here's the thing nobody tells you about breaking. It rarely happens because of one thing. People look back at their breaking point and they try to find the cause, the conversation that did it, the rejection, the loss, the failure, the thing they can point to and say, that's what broke me. But that's not really how it works. A mental or emotional collapse is rarely a singular event. Clinicians now understand it as the culmination of a multi-stage psychological progression, a systemic collapse of the internal scaffolding that allows us to navigate daily life. In other words, you didn't break because of what happened that day. You broke because of everything that happened before it. Everything you pushed down. Every time you told yourself you were fine when you weren't. Every weight you added to a load that was already too heavy. And then one day, one ordinary, unremarkable day, something small happened. And that small thing was just the last grain of sand on a scale that had been tipping for months. And people blamed that last grain. But the grain wasn't the problem. The weight was always the problem. Let me tell you what's happening inside your body when you reach that edge. Your brain has a built-in stress system. When you sense a threat, your hypothalamus sends signals. Hormones flood your body. Cortisol, adrenaline. Your heart rate climbs, your muscles tighten, your focus narrows. This system works well for short-term dangers, but chronic stress breaks that cycle. When stressors don't let up for weeks or months, cortisol stays elevated and the feedback mechanism stops working properly. Persistently high cortisol is linked to inflammation in the brain, disrupted sleep, weakened immune function, and changes in brain regions involved in mood and memory. Your brain was built to handle storms, short ones, intense ones, and then return to calm. But what happens when the storm never leaves? What happens when you've been in survival mode for so long that your nervous system simply forgets what peace feels like? The system doesn't just get tired, it starts to malfunction. And eventually, it forces a shutdown. When we view a mental breakdown through a clinical lens, it becomes clear it is a survival mechanism. The brain's way of forcing a shutdown when its resources are entirely depleted. Your breaking point wasn't a failure. It was your body doing the only thing left it knew how to do. It was saying, enough. We cannot keep going like this. Something has to change. But here's what makes it so hard, so genuinely, specifically painful. Most people who break are not people who gave up easily. They are the ones who held on the longest, the ones who kept going when they probably should have stopped, who kept saying, I'm fine, long after fine stopped being true, who carried other people's weight alongside their own, who were so committed to not breaking that they broke harder. Research confirms that suppressing emotions triggers a surge in stress responses, rapid heart rate, high blood pressure, an overactive nervous system. What stays hidden in your heart doesn't disappear, it settles into your body. Think about that. Everything you swallowed instead of feeling, every time you said I'm okay and meant I'm barely surviving, every tear you held back because there wasn't space to fall apart. It went somewhere. It always goes somewhere. And the body keeps the score. Physical symptoms often appear before the emotional collapse. Persistent exhaustion,
chest tightness, digestive problems, headaches, muscle tension, shortness of breath. These physical signs are the body's early warning system. They often show up days or weeks before the full emotional crisis hits. Your body was trying to warn you. Long before the breaking point arrived, your body was already sending signals. The exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix, the headaches with no medical explanation, the way your chest tightened for no clear reason, the hollow feeling behind your eyes. You probably told yourself it was just stress, just tiredness, just a phase. But your body wasn't tired. Your body was desperate. It was knocking on the door, getting louder and louder, because the one living inside wasn't listening. And then the moment comes. Prolonged stress can cause structural changes in different parts of the brain. Difficulty concentrating, remembering things, feeling unable to make decisions. These aren't signs of weakness. They are signs of a system under extraordinary pressure. In the moment everything breaks, you might not be able to explain what's happening. You might not have words for it. It might just feel like fog, like the volume of everything turned all the way down, like you're watching your own life from somewhere slightly outside of it. Or it might feel like the opposite, like everything is suddenly unbearably loud and you can't make it stop. Some people become so overwhelmed they weep uncontrollably. Others explode. Some panic. Some retreat so far inside themselves they become unreachable. There is no single way it looks from the outside, but from the inside, it always feels the same, like something fundamental just came apart, like the version of yourself that was managing everything, holding everything, performing everything, finally sat down and couldn't get back up. Here's the part that really stays with me. As many as 26% of adults could experience a breakdown at some point in their lives. 1 in 4 people, and almost none of them talk about it. Not really, not honestly, not in the way that would actually help someone else feel less alone in it. Because there's shame attached to breaking. We live in a world that praises strength, that rewards people who keep going, that holds up the ones who never seem to crack as something worth aspiring to. And so, when we break, we assume it means we failed, that we weren't strong enough, that there was something fundamentally wrong with us that wasn't wrong with other people. But 1 in 4, friend. 1 in 4. You were never as alone in this as it felt. Now I want to tell you something that psychology has been quietly discovering. Something that genuinely changes how you see the breaking. It's called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is the positive psychological change that some individuals experience after a life crisis or traumatic event. It doesn't deny deep distress, but it holds that adversity can unintentionally yield changes in understanding oneself, others, and the world. This concept was developed by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, and what they found quietly overturned the way we think about collapse. Traumatic events typically shatter our worldview. We tend to rely on a particular set of beliefs and assumptions about the world, and when everything breaks, those assumptions break with it. We're left to rebuild ourselves and our worlds from the ground up. And here is the part that matters. When we're forced to reflect on our lives and make sense of the destruction caused by trauma, our struggles can become a catalyst for change. Through our darkest moments, we are tested and forged into wiser, more authentic human beings. The breaking is also the opening. Not immediately, not while you're still in the middle of it, but eventually, for many people, the collapse creates a space that nothing else could have created. A space for honesty, for reckoning, for finally looking at the life you were living and asking, was this actually mine? Was this what I wanted? Or was I just performing a version of okay for everyone around me? People develop new understandings of themselves, the world they live in, how to relate to other people, the kind of future they might have, and a better understanding of how to live life. The people who come through their breaking point, they are not the same people who entered it, not because they became harder, not because they built thicker walls, but because they finally stopped pretending. They stopped carrying things that were never theirs to carry. They stopped shrinking themselves to fit into spaces that didn't deserve them. They stopped saying, "I'm fine," when they meant, "I'm completely lost." The breaking stripped something away. And underneath all the performance and the pushing and the holding it together, they found something more real, something quieter and sturdier and true. So if you're in it right now, if you're sitting in the rubble of your own breaking point, if everything feels like it came apart and you can't quite see what comes next, I want to say something to you directly. What you are feeling is real. The exhaustion is real. The confusion is real. The grief of it, the grief of realizing you couldn't keep going the way you were going, that is real, and it deserves to be felt. You don't have to fix it today. You don't have to explain it to anyone who isn't ready to understand. You don't have to find the lesson in it yet. The lesson comes later. Right now, you just have to stay. Just breathe. Just be here. Because trauma does not have to be the end of the road. It can be the path to a new beginning. Not in a cheap, motivational poster kind of way. In a real, hard-earned, scar tissue kind of way. The moment everything breaks is terrifying, but it is also, if you let it be, the most honest moment you have ever lived. Because for the first time in maybe a long time, you are not performing, you are not managing, not holding it together, not pretending. You are just here, raw, real, human. And from that place, that broken, exhausted, finally honest place, something new gets to begin. You didn't break because you were weak. You broke because you were human. And humans were built to break open, not apart, open. Chapter 8. Realizing thoughts are not reality. What if I told you that the thought sitting in your head right now, the one that feels so real, so heavy, so absolutely certain, is not the truth, not even close? And what if I told you that you've been living your life, making decisions, avoiding people, shrinking yourself, lying awake at 3 a.m., based on stories your brain invented? Stay with me, because this one is going to shake something loose in you. Here's something most people never stop to question. We assume that because we thought something, it must mean something. We assume that because a thought arrived in our mind, it deserves our full attention, our belief, our obedience. Someone doesn't reply to your message, and immediately, without any evidence, without any actual information, your mind produces a verdict. They hate you. You said something wrong. You're too much. You're not enough. And you don't question it. You just believe it because it came from inside you. And we've been taught, quietly, without anyone ever saying it directly, that what comes from inside us must be true. But here's the thing psychology has been trying to tell us for decades. Your mind is not a truth machine. It is a pattern machine, a prediction machine, a survival machine. And survival machines lie constantly. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive fusion. Cognitive fusion is the fusion between what you think and who you think you are. You actually merge with your own thoughts and become unable to separate yourself from them. The processes of your thoughts and your consciousness become so intermingled that you forget to compare what you think with the reality that made you think that way. In other words, you stop seeing your thoughts as thoughts. You start seeing them as facts. And that shift, that one quiet, devastating shift, changes everything. Because now you're not just having a thought that says, I'm going to fail. You are someone who is going to fail. You're not having a thought that says, nobody really cares about me. You are someone nobody really cares about. The thought becomes identity. The story becomes reality. The weather becomes the sky, and you don't even notice it happened. When you let thoughts control your behavior, like deleting your dating profile even though you want a relationship, because your mind says, I'm unlovable, that's cognitive fusion at work. Instead of seeing the thought as just a passing mental event, it becomes your reality. Think about how many times you've done a version of this. You didn't apply for the thing because your mind said you weren't qualified. And you didn't ask, is that actually true? You just believed it and moved on. You didn't say what you felt because your mind said you'd be judged, too sensitive, too much. And you didn't stop to question whether that was real. You swallowed it and smiled. You didn't try again after you failed because your mind said, see, this is proof. This is who you are. This is what you do. And that verdict felt so solid, so certain, so undeniably yours that you accepted it without a trial. That's what fusion does. It turns passing mental weather into permanent identity. And the worst part? It happens invisibly, automatically, before you even have a chance to think. Here's where the neuroscience gets genuinely disturbing. Most people experience intrusive thoughts, brief, unwanted thoughts that just pop into consciousness. The key difference between people who suffer and people who don't is not the content of the thoughts. It's how those thoughts are interpreted. Read that again. It's not what you think, it's what you do with what you think. Someone who doesn't fuse with their thoughts has the same dark, weird, uncomfortable thoughts you do. Everyone does. That's just what minds produce. They generate thousands of thoughts a day, the way your lungs generate breath, automatically, relentlessly, without asking your permission. But that person sees the thought arrive, notes it, and lets it pass, like a cloud crossing a sky that was never in danger of becoming the cloud. Someone who is fused sees the same thought arrive and immediately wraps their entire identity around it, builds a case for it, finds evidence to support it, until the thought stops being a visitor and becomes a resident, until it stops passing through and starts making decisions. Cognitive fusion plays a central role in many mental health struggles, including anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and social withdrawal. Not as a side effect, as a central mechanism. Because when your thoughts become reality, anxiety is inevitable. The thought, something bad is going to happen, becomes, something bad is definitely happening. I can feel it. It's real. I need to protect myself right now. The thought, I don't belong here, becomes the confirmed, settled truth that you are fundamentally out of place in your own life. And you build your days around these truths that were never truths. You shrink, you avoid, you perform, you manage, you exhaust yourself maintaining a life organized around the conclusions of a mind that was never appointed judge. There's something the philosopher René Descartes spent his whole life wrestling with. He famously said, I think, therefore I am. But he was asking a deeper question underneath that. How do I know what's real? How do I separate what I experience from what actually exists? He was tormented by this, and he never fully resolved it. Because the truth is, this is one of the hardest problems a human mind faces, separating the map from the territory. Your thoughts are the map, reality is the territory, and a map is useful, but a map is never the place itself. A map can be outdated, wrong, biased, missing entire regions that exist. And when you mistake the map for the territory, you stop exploring. You stop questioning. You just follow the map, even when it's leading you somewhere you never wanted to go. Here's the shift that changes things. Psychology calls it cognitive diffusion. Cognitive diffusion involves seeing thoughts as just thoughts, not facts. It helps individuals notice and separate from their thoughts, understanding they're not permanent, much like clouds in the sky. Not fighting the thought, not trying to replace it with something more positive, not arguing with it or suppressing it, just stepping back, just creating a tiny gap between you and the thought, enough space to remember, I am not this thought, I am the one noticing it. Cognitive fusion is like wearing glasses and seeing all of life through that lens. Cognitive diffusion is taking the glasses off, holding them in your hand, looking at them instead of through them. And in that moment of looking at the thought instead of through it, something profound happens. The thought loses its authority. It becomes what it always actually was, a passing mental event, a signal from a brain doing its best to protect you, but working from incomplete information, old data, borrowed fears. Not a verdict, not a truth, not a definition of who you are. Just a thought. Try this right now. The next time a hard thought arrives, the one that says you're not enough, or you'll always be this way, or nothing will ever change. Don't argue with it. Just say quietly to yourself, I notice I'm having the thought that I'm not enough. That's it. That one small move, that tiny linguistic distance, naming the story your mind is telling. Here's the I'm not good enough story again. Reminds you it is just a story, not reality. And stories can be questioned. Stories can be rewritten. Stories are not the same as facts. The version of you that has been suffering has mostly been suffering inside a story about who you are, what you deserve, what's possible, what's safe. A story your mind wrote with the best intentions and the worst information. And that story is not your life. Your life is happening right now, in the actual world, with actual people, with actual possibilities that your fused, frightened mind has been quietly editing out. The realization that thoughts are not reality doesn't make everything better overnight, but it opens a door that you didn't know was there, a door back to your actual experience, back to the present moment, back to a version of yourself that exists beneath all the mental noise, quieter, more honest, more free. Your thoughts are not reality. They are your mind's best guess, and your mind can be wrong, which means everything it ever told you about your limits deserves a second look. Chapter 9. The truth you are avoiding. There's something you already know. You've known it for a while now. It lives somewhere quiet inside you. Not loud, not dramatic, just there. Like a low hum underneath everything, underneath the busyness and the distractions and the conversations you fill your days with. A truth. And every single day, you find a way to not look at it. Today, we're going to look at it together. Here's the thing about truth that nobody warns you about. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It just sits there, patient, quiet, permanent. And the more energy you spend avoiding it, the heavier it gets, the more space it takes up, the more it starts shaping your life from the inside, while you pretend it isn't there. The truth you've been avoiding isn't hiding from you. You've been hiding from it. And there's a very important difference. Psychology has a name for what we do when reality feels too uncomfortable to face. It's called self-deception. And before you think, that's not me, I'm an honest person, stay with me. Because self-deception is not about being a bad person. It's not about intentional lying. Self-deception is a process of denying or rationalizing away the relevance, significance, or importance of opposing evidence and logical argument. It involves convincing yourself of a truth, or a lack of truth, so completely that you no longer recognize you're doing it. That's the disturbing part. You don't know you're doing it. The person who tells themselves their relationship is fine actually believes it on some level. The person who insists they're happy in a life that doesn't fit them has genuinely convinced themselves, for most waking hours, that they are. People favor welcome information over unwelcome information. We search for evidence that confirms what we want to believe. We interpret things in ways that support the story we're already telling ourselves. We remember selectively. Your entire information processing system has been quietly working to protect you from the thing you most need to see. And here's what makes it so seductive. Self-deception reduces cognitive load. When you convince yourself that the comfortable story is true, you no longer need to hold the painful truth alongside the fiction. You can relax. You can focus on other things. The mind feels lighter. That's why we do it. Not because we're weak, not because we're cowards, but because the mind is genuinely trying to protect you from pain it thinks you can't handle. It's doing something kind. The problem is, the kindness is borrowed, and the debt always comes due. Think about the truth you've been most successfully avoiding. Maybe it's about a relationship you've outgrown, that the version of yourself you are around this person is smaller than who you actually are, and you've known it for months, maybe years, but leaving feels impossible. So instead you rationalize, you find the good things, you focus on the history, you tell yourself it's not that bad. Or maybe it's about your direction, that the path you're on, the one you chose, or the one that was chosen for you, doesn't actually fit. That there's another version of your life, one that feels more honest, more alive. But it requires admitting that the current one isn't working. And admitting that means admitting time, years, maybe a whole identity built around a choice that was wrong. Or maybe it's something more internal, something about yourself. A pattern you keep repeating, a way you treat people, a way you treat yourself, something you've seen glimpses of but always managed to look away from just before it came fully into focus. The avoidance isn't random. We avoid the truth that would require the most from us. Self-deception is central to the human necessity of balancing two fundamental motivations. People want accurate information about their world. At the same time, they need to defend against information that would destroy the ideas their lives are built on. That's the tension. Because the truth you've been avoiding is often a truth that your entire identity is organized around not being true. It threatens the story, the comfortable, coherent narrative you've constructed about who you are, what you deserve, what's possible for you. And the mind does whatever it takes to protect that story. It reframes, it minimizes, it finds excuses, it points to external reasons. It stays busy. It fills every quiet moment so you never have to sit with the feeling that something is not right. But here's what the research is unambiguous about. The long-term costs of emotional suppression and avoidance include increased anxiety and stress as unprocessed emotions build up, depression from consistently ignoring what's real, strained relationships from the lack of honest communication, and physical symptoms, headaches, muscle tension, digestive problems, all connected to the effort of holding the truth at arm's length. Your body knows what your mind refuses to admit. Studies have demonstrated that individuals who repress what they feel also suppress their body's immunity, making them more vulnerable to a wide range of physical illness. Emotions become increasingly intense the longer they are suppressed. The truth doesn't disappear because you look away. It finds other ways to speak. Through the anxiety that visits at 3 a.m., through the restlessness that makes no sense, through the strange, hollow feeling in the middle of moments that are supposed to feel good, through the short temper that flares for reasons that seem unrelated but aren't. Your body has been carrying the weight of the thing your mind refuses to hold, and it is exhausted. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote about what he called despair, not the dramatic, weeping kind, but the quiet kind, the despair of not being who you actually are, the despair of building a life around a self that isn't fully real. He called it the sickness unto death, not physical death, but the slow, silent death of living out of alignment with your own truth. And the most painful thing he observed was this. Most people in this state don't even know they're despairing. They're just vaguely uncomfortable, vaguely restless, vaguely dissatisfied, not dramatically suffering, just never quite settled, never quite at home in their own life, because there's a truth they haven't faced. And until they do, no amount of distraction, achievement, or rearranging of the outside will reach the place inside where the discomfort actually lives. So let me ask you something directly. What is the thing you already know but haven't let yourself fully admit? Not the surface level stuff, not the manageable concerns, the deeper one. The one that, if you sat with it completely honestly for 5 minutes, would change something, require something, ask something of you that you haven't been willing to give. I know it feels safer to keep it at a distance. I know the rationalizations feel almost indistinguishable from actual reasoning by now. I know the avoidance has become so practiced it barely feels like avoidance anymore. But you feel it, underneath everything. That low, persistent hum, the truth, waiting. Here's what facing it actually looks like. It's not one dramatic moment of reckoning. It's not a single conversation that changes everything. When you begin to feel what you've been avoiding, you don't fall apart. You come home to yourself. You reclaim your voice, your clarity, your humanity. It starts with just a moment of honesty. Private, just you, saying, I know, I've known, and I've been pretending not to. That one admission, that one moment of dropping the defense, doesn't solve everything, but it ends something. It ends the exhausting performance of not knowing something you've always known. And in the space that opens up after that, clarity starts to arrive. Slowly, quietly. Real clarity. Not the manufactured kind that comes from working hard to convince yourself everything is fine, but the settled, grounded clarity that comes from finally standing in the same place as your own truth. Suppressing emotions might help you survive, but it won't help you thrive. True strength lies not in pretending everything is fine, but in showing up honestly, with yourself and others. The truth you've been avoiding is not going to destroy you. It was never going to destroy you. That was the story fear told you to keep you from looking. The truth was always just the beginning of something more real than what you've been living. You already know what it is. You've known this whole time. The only question that was ever really on the table was when you'd finally let yourself know that you know. That moment can be now. It doesn't have to be loud, just honest, just real, just you finally standing in the same room as the truth you've been avoiding and realizing with something that feels almost like relief, it was never the monster you made it out to be. It was just the door to the life you were meant to be living. Chapter 10. Letting go of the need to know everything. Let me ask you something that's going to feel slightly uncomfortable. When was the last time you sat with a question and didn't immediately reach for an answer? Not Google, not a friend, not scrolling, not a distraction. Just sat with the not knowing and let it exist. If you're struggling to remember, that's actually the point. Because somewhere along the way, not knowing became unbearable, and we turned certainty into an addiction we don't even recognize as one. Here's something that will genuinely stop you for a second. Your brain right now, at this very moment, is doing something it does every second of every day. It is predicting. Before you finish reading this sentence, your brain has already predicted the end of it. Before a conversation ends, your brain has already generated the most likely response. Before you walk into a room, your brain has already built a mental model of what's inside. This is called predictive processing, and it's one of the most fundamental things your brain does. It is a prediction machine, an anticipation engine, constantly, obsessively building models of what comes next, so reality never catches you completely off guard. And here's where it gets interesting. When reality matches the prediction, your brain barely notices. It just moves on. But when reality doesn't match, when something unexpected happens, when the answer doesn't come, your brain fires hard. It treats the mismatch like a threat, like something is wrong, like the world just became less safe. And that feeling, that specific discomfort of not knowing, is not weakness. It is literally your brain doing what it evolved to do. The problem is, it was never built for a world this complex, this ambiguous, this full of questions that don't have clean answers. So your brain keeps demanding certainty in a world that fundamentally, structurally, cannot provide it. And you've been paying the price. Psychology has a name for what happens when this gets out of hand. Intolerance of uncertainty refers to a tendency to react negatively to uncertain situations. It's the idea that people feel they need guarantees in life and struggle to cope with unpredictability. People with high intolerance of uncertainty experience distress at the mere possibility of a negative event occurring, even when that event is unlikely to happen. Not when bad things happen, at the possibility that they might, at the gap between what you know and what you don't. Researchers have mapped this precisely. Statements like, "Uncertainty keeps me from living a full life," and "When it's time to act, uncertainty paralyzes me," and "The smallest doubt can stop me from acting." These are the lived experience of someone whose need to know everything has become the thing standing between them and their own life. The need to know everything becomes the thing blocking you from living. Not the uncertainty itself, the inability to tolerate it. And here's the part that should really make you pause. Research has recognized intolerance of uncertainty as a transdiagnostic risk factor, meaning it doesn't just cause one problem, it contributes to anxiety, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and eating disorders. It cuts across almost every category of mental suffering. One thing, underneath so many different kinds of pain, the inability to be okay with not knowing. Think about what this means in your actual daily life. You lie awake at night running scenarios, not because something bad happened, but because something might, because you don't know. And not knowing, to a part of your brain, feels exactly like danger. You refresh your messages compulsively, not because you're excited, but because the gap between sending and receiving feels like something might be wrong. And you need to close that gap. You need to know. You overthink decisions until they're paralyzed, not because the options are bad, but because you cannot know for certain which is right, and your brain refuses to move until it does. You replay conversations, constantly, looking for the clue you missed, the thing that would explain why they said what they said, what it means, what comes next, all of it in pursuit of certainty, all of it exhausting, and none of it actually working, because certainty never arrives, and the chase never ends. Now here's the question that I want you to sit with for a moment. What if the need to know everything is not a search for safety? What if it's actually a form of control, disguised as intelligence? Think about it. We celebrate people who always have answers. We call them confident, capable, put together. We've built an entire social reward system around appearing certain. Saying, "I don't know," feels like weakness, feels like vulnerability, feels like exposing something that should be hidden. So we perform certainty. We claim answers we don't actually have. We fill the silence with noise because silence feels like failure. And in doing so, we've made ourselves prisoners of a performance that never allows us to rest. Here's what the Stoics understood. and what modern neuroscience is now confirming. The ancient Stoics divided all of existence into two categories: what is within your control and what is not. And they were ruthlessly, almost violently clear about which category most things fall into. Other people's decisions? Not yours. The future? Not yours. Whether something works out the way you want? Not yours. And they weren't being pessimistic. They weren't saying give up. They were saying spend your energy where it can actually move something, and stop bleeding your life away trying to control what was never controllable. Modern neuroscience agrees. When you encounter uncertainty, your amygdala treats it as a potential threat and releases stress hormones. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex tries to analyze and plan. These two systems pull against each other. And research suggests that handling uncertainty isn't about suppressing the emotional response or forcing logical override. It's about integrating both, holding the discomfort without being consumed by it, not eliminating the feeling, holding it without drowning. And now the part that genuinely changed something in me when I first understood it. Uncertainty is actually a kind of good stress. When we encounter something new, ambiguous, or unexpected, our brain becomes more receptive to new information. Attention broadens, working memory improves. It's a kind of wakefulness, an opportunity to learn that wouldn't exist if everything were already known. The discomfort of not knowing is your brain becoming more open, more curious, more alive. Research has found that individuals exposed to ambiguous situations exhibited greater cognitive flexibility, enhanced creativity and problem-solving ability compared to those operating in conditions of certainty. Certainty closes the mind. Uncertainty, when you stop fighting it, opens it. The most creative, most innovative, most genuinely alive people in history were not the ones who had all the answers. They were the ones who were comfortable, genuinely, deeply comfortable, sitting inside a question. Einstein didn't discover relativity by demanding a certain answer. He held the question for years, tolerating the not knowing, staying curious inside the gap. The question was the thing. So here's what letting go of the need to know everything actually looks like. Not naivety, not giving up on thinking. It's a specific, practiced shift in how you relate to open questions. Instead of treating "I don't know" as a problem to be solved immediately, you start treating it as information, as space, as an invitation to stay curious a little longer before grasping for closure. You notice when you're reaching for certainty to manage anxiety rather than to genuinely understand something. And you pause, just for a breath, and ask, do I actually need to know this right now? And sometimes the honest answer is no. Sometimes the reaching is just fear wearing the mask of intelligence. There's a beautiful concept in Zen philosophy called beginner's mind. The idea that the expert's mind has very few possibilities because the expert already knows. But the beginner's mind, it has infinite possibilities because it hasn't closed anything off yet. The need to know everything is the expert's trap, the belief that certainty equals safety, that if you just know enough, you can control enough, and nothing will hurt you. But life doesn't work that way. Life is fundamentally, irreducibly uncertain, and the people who live most fully inside it are not the ones who found a way to know everything. They're the ones who learned to be at home in the not knowing, who discovered that the gap between question and answer isn't emptiness. It's where everything interesting lives. You don't need to know how it ends. You don't need to know if they'll stay, if it'll work, if you made the right choice, if this is the right path. You just need to be here, honest, present, moving. Targeting tolerance for uncertainty is now one of the most promising treatments for anxiety. teaching people practical ways to try new things, to work at the edge of the known. At the edge of the known. That's where you are right now. And that's not a frightening place. That's the only place where anything new has ever been discovered. Stop trying to know everything. Start getting curious about what it feels like to not know. Because the mind that can sit comfortably inside a question is a mind that is finally, genuinely free. Chapter 11. Choosing action over endless thinking. Here's the most honest thing I can say to you right now. You already know what you need to do. You've known for a while. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to start, enough to move, enough to take one real step in one real direction. But you haven't. And the reason isn't laziness. It isn't weakness. It isn't that you don't care enough. It's something quieter, something that masquerades as intelligence, as responsibility, as being careful. You're still thinking about it. Let me show you something that's going to genuinely disturb you. There is a 2018 study. Researchers used EEG machines to track brain activity in real time while people made decisions. The participants who took the longest to decide showed a very specific pattern. Their thinking circuits were in overdrive, and their action circuits were being actively suppressed. The brain wasn't failing to decide, it was actively preventing itself from deciding. Read that again slowly. Your brain actively preventing itself from deciding. Not because it needs more information, not because the decision is genuinely impossible, but because the thinking loop had taken over, and the action circuits had gone quiet. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable. This is happening inside your actual skull. And the terrifying part? It feels like progress. It feels like you're working on it. It feels like you're being responsible, but your brain is, neurologically, holding you in place. There's a name for this. Psychology calls it analysis paralysis. Analysis paralysis is when the fear of either making an error or missing a better solution outweighs the realistic value of just deciding. And the result is suppressed decision-making, an unconscious effort to preserve existing options, while life quietly moves on without you. An unconscious effort to preserve existing options. Think about what that means. Every time you delay, every time you say, I need to think about this more, every time you research one more thing, ask one more person, make one more pros and cons list that you'll never finish. You're not being careful. You're preserving the feeling of possibility while never actually reaching for it. Because as long as you haven't decided, you can't have failed. As long as you haven't started, the dream is still perfect in your head. The thinking protects you from the risk of finding out what actually happens when you try. Here's something a Stanford study found that stopped me completely. Researchers monitored students' brains with MRI machines while they completed creative tasks. The more thought the participants put into the task, the worse their creative output became. Overthinking negatively impacts creativity. The brain performs better when it stops overanalyzing and simply acts. The more you think about it, the worse you do. That is not intuitive. That goes against everything we were taught. We were taught that more thought equals better decisions, that preparation equals success, that if you just think hard enough for long enough, clarity will arrive. But that's not what the data shows. What the data shows is that at a certain point, and this point arrives much sooner than we realize, more thinking is not refining your path forward. It's erasing it. And here's the thing nobody talks about honestly. Research shows that maximizers, people who are determined to make the best possible decision, are measurably less happy than satisficers, people who make good enough choices and move forward. Less happy, not more successful, not safer, not better off. Less happy. Because the maximizer never rests. The maximizer is always asking, but what if there was a better option? What if I missed something? What if the perfect answer was one more search away? And that question has no end. There is always another option you haven't considered. There is always more information you haven't gathered. The perfect decision, fully informed, with zero uncertainty, does not exist. And chasing it doesn't make you careful, it makes you stuck. Here is the philosophical truth that ancient wisdom figured out long before science could measure it. The Stoics had a concept they called prohairesis, roughly translated, the act of choosing, of exercising will, of moving. Marcus Aurelius, who was managing the most complex empire in the world and also one of the most active, reflective minds in history, wrote this to himself: "Don't think, act. You have the capacity, use it, not blindly, not without wisdom, but with the understanding that thinking divorced from action is not wisdom. It is fear wearing the mask of wisdom." Aristotle said something even sharper. He said that virtue, actually being a good person, actually living well, is not something you think your way into. It is something you do your way into. You become courageous by doing courageous things, not by thinking about courage. You become the person you want to be by acting like that person, not by waiting until you feel ready. Ready is a feeling that arrives after the action, not before it. Let me make this even more personal. Think about something you've been putting off, something real, something that actually matters to you. How long have you been thinking about it? Weeks? Months? Longer? And in all that time, what has changed? Have you gathered some information? Yes. Have you gotten clearer? Maybe. But have you actually moved? Or has the thinking just continued? Research indicates that when you stay in the habit of overthinking, you lose confidence in your own ability to process information and make decisions. You start avoiding responsibility. Overthinking harms your physical and mental health. It leads to insomnia, anxiety, elevated blood pressure, headaches. The thinking is not neutral. The waiting is not safe. Every day you spend inside the loop is a day your confidence in yourself quietly erodes. Not dramatically, just slightly. A little less certain that you can do it. A little more convinced that you need to be more ready than you are, until eventually the distance between you and starting feels so large that starting feels impossible, and you wonder how you got so far away from the life you wanted. You got there one "I'll think about it more" at a time. Here is the shift, and it's logical, and it's real. The brain's action circuits get suppressed by the thinking loop, which means the only way to reactivate them is to act, even imperfectly, even incompletely, even when you're not sure. Action is not the reward for finishing thinking. Action is what breaks the thinking loop. This is not motivational poster stuff. This is neuroscience. The circuit that gets you moving only switches on when you actually move. You cannot think your way into being an action taker. You have to act your way into being one. And here's the part that rewires something fundamental if you really let it land. You don't need the full plan. You need the next step, not the destination, not the complete map, not certainty about how it ends, just the next honest step. The email you've been composing in your head for 3 weeks. Send a version of it today. Not the perfect version, a version. The conversation you've been rehearsing. Have it, imperfectly, in real words with a real person. The thing you want to start. Start something smaller than you think you're supposed to start with. Something so small it almost seems pointless. And do that. Because here is what nobody tells you about starting small. The brain doesn't know the difference between a tiny act of courage and a massive one. It just registers, we moved. And the next time, moving feels slightly more natural. And the time after that, slightly more again. Momentum is real, and it is built entirely from action, not from thinking about action. The version of your life you keep imagining, the one that lives just on the other side of "when I'm finally ready." It is not waiting for you to figure everything out. It is waiting for you to move. And you don't have to be ready. You just have to begin. Because thinking will never be finished, but your life is already happening. Chapter 12. Rebuilding a Silent Mind. I want you to do something before we begin. Just breathe. One slow breath in, hold it gently, and let it go. Not because it's a technique, but because somewhere between waking up this morning and right now, you forgot to simply breathe without a reason. And that forgetting, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. There's a version of you that existed before the noise started, before the overthinking, before the anxiety, before every moment became something to analyze, manage, or survive. A version that woke up and just existed, without immediately loading the weight of every unresolved thing, without the mental commentary that runs like a program in the background of every single experience. You remember that version, even faintly. Maybe it was childhood. Maybe it was one specific afternoon somewhere, sometime, when you felt genuinely still inside. That version of you isn't gone. It's just buried under years of mental noise you never got the chance to put down. And rebuilding that silence, that's what today is really about. Here's something that genuinely changed how I understand the mind. Scientists discovered something about the brain that nobody expected. They assumed that when a person is doing nothing, just resting, just sitting quietly, the brain would go quiet too. It didn't. When you are not engaged in a task, not paying attention to something specific, not solving a problem, a constellation of brain regions lights up and begins doing something very particular. It starts talking about you, rehashing a conversation from last week, worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, replaying an awkward moment from 10 years ago. Scientists named this the default mode network, and it is, essentially, your brain's inner narrator, running almost constantly, commenting, judging, predicting, worrying, reviewing. For most of human history, this mental chatter was something we felt but couldn't see. Then came the neuroscientists, and what they found was this. For most modern people, this network never really turns off. Not while eating, not while talking, not while trying to sleep, not while sitting in a quiet room trying to feel okay. The narrator just keeps going, and you've been living with that narrator for so long that you've started to confuse its voice with your own. But here's the part that should give you something to hold on to. Relaxation techniques, mindfulness, meditation, even deep breathing can quiet the default mode network. Experienced meditators show significantly less activity in this network. They are measurably better at curtailing mind wandering. The brain can be rebuilt towards silence, not through force, not through discipline alone, but through something quieter and more patient, through practice, through gentleness, through the repeated humble act of returning to stillness every time the noise pulls you away. By repeatedly practicing new ways of thinking and feeling, we can reshape the brain to respond with greater resilience and calmness. We are not stuck with our habitual patterns of chronic worry or fearfulness. We can create a foundation of inner peace that becomes more automatic over time. Dr. Rick Hanson, https://rickhanson.com/neuroplasticity-and-anxiety. Automatic. Imagine that. A mind that defaults not to noise, but to quiet. That's not a fantasy. That's what neuroplasticity actually makes possible. But I want to be honest with you about something first. Rebuilding a silent mind is not what most people think it is. It's not about emptying your head. It's not about achieving some perfect, blissful state of zero thought. It's about changing your relationship with the thoughts that arrive. Right now, when a thought comes, it pulls you. You follow it. You engage with it. You get dragged into the story it's telling. And before you know it, 10 minutes have passed and you're 3 conversations deep inside your own head about something that may never even happen. What rebuilding silence actually means is learning to watch the thought arrive, acknowledge it, and let it pass. Like sitting beside a river, thoughts are the water. They keep moving. They were always going to keep moving. The problem was never the river. The problem was that you kept jumping in. Now, take another breath, slow, and stay with me here, because this next part is important. After chronic stress, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes overactive. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and emotional regulation, underperforms. The hippocampus, involved in memory and perspective, can actually shrink under prolonged stress. Your brain was physically changed by the noise you've been living with. Not permanently, but really. The good news, and this is where the science becomes genuinely moving, is that the brain can change back. Even after significant stress, new neural pathways can form, allowing individuals to regain emotional balance and cognitive control. Healing is not linear, but it is real. The brain that was changed by struggle can be changed again by care. The mind you want to rebuild is not a new mind. It's your original mind, finding its way back. So what does rebuilding actually look like, practically, in your real daily life? It starts with something almost embarrassingly small. It starts with noticing, not fixing, not solving, not immediately trying to think your way out of the thoughts, just noticing. You sit down, somewhere comfortable, and for 5 minutes, just 5, you let your mind be exactly as loud as it is, without arguing with it, without trying to quiet it by force. You breathe slowly, and you notice the thoughts like clouds moving across a sky you're sitting beneath, not becoming the clouds, just watching them. This is not a metaphor for spiritual people. This is a measurable neurological practice that physically changes how your brain operates over time. And 5 minutes, done consistently, is more powerful than an hour done occasionally with frustration. There's another layer to this, a practical one. Most of us have trained ourselves to never be truly unoccupied. We eat with screens. We walk with earphones. We fill every waiting moment with content. Every silence becomes a signal to scroll. And in doing that, we've quietly destroyed one of the most important things the human mind needs: unstructured rest. Flow states, being deeply engrossed in an activity until time disappears, shift the brain away from the default mode network and into focused, goal-directed thinking. Hobbies like painting, writing, or playing music can help regulate the overactive inner narrator naturally. Find one thing, just one, that asks for your full presence without demanding your anxiety. Something with your hands, something creative, something that puts you in your body instead of spinning endlessly in your head. Not because it's productive, but because your nervous system has forgotten what it feels like to be engaged without being stressed, and it needs to remember. Here's a truth about silence that most people don't expect. The first time you sit in real quiet, it won't feel peaceful. It'll feel uncomfortable, maybe even a little frightening. Because the mind that has been running on noise for years treats silence like a threat, like something is wrong, like there must be something you should be thinking about, worrying about, figuring out. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign the rebuilding has begun. Because the noise was never silence. It was just familiarity. And familiar things feel safe, even when they're hurting us. The unfamiliar stillness feels dangerous until it becomes home. And it will become home if you return to it again and again with patience instead of judgment. So let's end here with this. Take one more breath, slow, all the way in. Hold it for just a moment and release it completely. Feel that tiny, brief clearing after the exhale, that space between one breath and the next. That is what you're rebuilding toward. Not a dramatic transformation, not a distant future version of yourself who is finally perfectly at peace. Just that, moment by moment, the ability to find that small clearing more often, to return to it when the noise returns, to know it's always there, underneath everything, waiting. With focused practice, we can create a foundation of inner peace and strength that supports a healthier, less anxious mind. Your mind was not always this loud, and it does not have to stay this way. The silence was there before the noise arrived, and with patience, with gentleness, with the same care you would give to anything worth rebuilding, it will be there again, quieter, steadier, yours. You don't have to fix everything today. You just have to sit, breathe, and let the rebuilding begin. One breath, one moment of quiet, one small return to yourself. That's enough. That has always been enough. Chapter 13. Becoming comfortable with uncertainty. Before anything else, just settle in. Wherever you are right now, let your shoulders drop. Unclench whatever you're clenching, and breathe. Slow, easy, like you have nowhere urgent to be. Because right now, you don't. This one is going to ask something quiet of you, and I think you're ready for it. Here is a question that sounds simple, but I want you to sit with it honestly. How much of your suffering is not about what's actually happening, but about what might happen? Think about that. The anxiety at 3 a.m., the chest tightness before an important day, the loop of worst-case scenarios your mind runs when you're trying to sleep. None of that is the actual future. It's your mind's response to not knowing what the future holds. And that not knowing, that gap between what is and what might be, is what we spend most of our lives trying to close, desperately, exhaustingly, often unsuccessfully. Here's where the science becomes genuinely fascinating. All that uncertainty has a profound effect on our physiology. Ambiguous circumstances mean that our imagination can run away with us. We can conjure every possible bad thing that might happen, even very unlikely things. And our physiology doesn't distinguish between actual and imagined stresses. We activate our biological stress response in anticipation of upcoming stresses. Your body cannot tell the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. When you lie awake imagining something going wrong, your heart rate, your cortisol levels, your nervous system all respond as if it is already going wrong. You are physiologically experiencing a future that doesn't exist yet, and in many cases, a future that will never exist at all. Humans are wired to reduce uncertainty, even if it means choosing a known negative outcome over an ambiguous one. The anticipation of an unpredictable threat keeps the nervous system on high alert, biologically and emotionally taxing. This is sometimes called uncertainty aversion, and it has evolutionary roots. Better to prepare for a known danger than remain paralyzed by the unknown. So your brain is not broken for struggling with this. It is ancient and loyal and doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is, it was designed for a world of physical dangers that resolved quickly, not for a world of open-ended questions, invisible futures, and the particular modern torture of having endless information about everything, except what we most need to know. Take a breath here, slow and easy. Feel the ground beneath you. Feel the weight of your own body. You are here, right now, and right now, nothing is wrong. Hold that for just a moment. Now, here's the thought that should genuinely stop you. Intolerance of uncertainty has been identified as a transdiagnostic risk factor, meaning it doesn't just contribute to one condition, it has been implicated in generalized anxiety disorder, OCD, social anxiety, health anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. One underlying pattern. Underneath so many different forms of suffering, the inability to be at peace with not knowing. And think about how this shows up in your actual life, not in clinical language, in the real texture of your days. You send a message and then check your phone 30 times while waiting for a reply, not because the reply matters that much, because the waiting feels unbearable. You replay a conversation trying to decode what someone meant, not to solve anything, just to close the gap, to know. You plan and overplan and make contingency plans for your contingency plans, not because you enjoy it, but because the sensation of having a plan feels, temporarily, like certainty. And for a moment, the anxiety quiets. And then a new unknown appears, and it starts again. As Epictetus famously said, there is only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things beyond the power of our will. Certainty is in the category of things beyond our power. The Stoics understood something 2,000 years ago that we are still struggling to accept. Certainty was never available, not to the Roman emperor, not to the philosopher, not to you. It was never on the menu, and every hour you spent trying to achieve it was an hour spent chasing something that doesn't exist. Buddhism arrived at the same truth from a different direction. So many people have not been trained to embrace the undeniable fact that uncertainty is the way things are. They are unable to make peace with that fact. Not a temporary state, not a problem to be solved, not a gap between where you are and where you'll be when things are finally figured out. Uncertainty is the way things are. It always was. It always will be. And the question has never been how to eliminate it. The question is, how do you learn to live inside it without suffering so much? And here's where something starts to shift. To sit with uncertainty is to say, even though I don't know what comes next, I trust that I can meet this moment with compassion. Our brains scream for escape routes, but over time, with gentle practice, we can expand our window of tolerance. We become more resilient, more adaptable, and paradoxically, more at ease in the face of not knowing. More at ease in the face of not knowing. That phrase is worth sitting with. Not in spite of not knowing. Inside of it. There is a quality of mind that can hold an open question without urgency, without panic, without demanding an answer before it's ready to arrive. That quality is not passive. It's not giving up. It's not pretending you don't want to know. It's trust. A specific, grounded, earned kind of trust. Trust that you have faced unknowns before, that you survived them, that the thing you were most afraid of not knowing eventually resolved, one way or another, and you were still here. Now breathe again. Genuinely. In through the nose, slow. Count to 4. Hold it gently for 2. Out through the mouth. Long. Let it all go. Slow, deep breaths help regulate your nervous system. Name what you're feeling. Fear, confusion, sadness. Stay with it for a few breaths without judgment. Bring a sense of kindness to yourself. These micro moments of awareness begin to rewire the brain. This is not just a nice idea. This is physiology. Every slow, deliberate exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system. It sends a signal to your brain that says, we are safe. We are okay. We do not need to run. And your brain listens. Not perfectly, not immediately, but it listens. Here's the curious thing that research found that most people never expect. A study found that after reading fiction, subjects felt more tolerant of ambiguity. Tolerance of uncertainty can ward us from making snap judgments and regretful decisions. Fiction, stories, narratives that don't resolve neatly, characters navigating open-ended lives. Reading them literally expanded people's capacity to sit with not knowing. Because stories practice something in us that ordinary information seeking doesn't. They ask us to stay inside a question, to follow a thread without knowing where it leads, to trust that meaning will emerge rather than demanding it arrive immediately. And the mind that can do that in a story starts to be able to do it in a life. So here is the actual practice, not abstract, not theoretical. The next time uncertainty grips you, The next time not knowing feels physically unbearable, try this. Don't search for an answer. Don't reach for your phone. Don't run the scenarios. Just put one hand on your chest, feel your own heartbeat, and say quietly to yourself, I don't know what comes next, and I am still here, still breathing, still okay. Not because everything is fine, but because right now, in this moment, you are more stable than the feeling is telling you. Research confirms that an increase in ambiguity tolerance produces a measurable decrease in perceived stress. Each time you practice sitting inside the unknown without fleeing, the tolerance builds, slowly, genuinely. The nervous system learns this feeling is not the same as danger. Uncertainty is not a threat. It is simply life in its most honest form. And slowly, something remarkable happens. The energy you were spending trying to know everything comes back to you. You have it now for actually living, for being present in conversations instead of analyzing them, for experiencing moments instead of managing them, for trusting people instead of trying to predict them. You stop squinting at the future and start actually seeing what's right in front of you, which turns out to be more than enough. Take one last breath with me, slow, deep, all the way in, and let it out completely. The future is uncertain. It always was. And you have always found your way through it, not because you knew what was coming, but because you were present enough, grounded enough, human enough to meet each moment as it arrived. That's all becoming comfortable with uncertainty ever was. Not knowing less, just fearing the not knowing a little less, every single day, until one day it starts to feel almost like freedom. Chapter 14. The Turning Point Within. Gently close your eyes for just a moment. Not for long, just a breath. Think about the person you were 1 year ago, 3 years ago, 5. Think about what they were certain about, what they were afraid of, what they thought was permanent. And now, open your eyes. Because here's the thing. That person changed. Maybe slowly, maybe painfully, maybe in ways you didn't even notice until you looked back. But somewhere between then and now, something shifted, something turned. And it didn't happen out there in the world. It happened in here. That's what we're exploring today. The turning point within. Not a dramatic event, not a sudden stroke of luck, not someone finally giving you the opportunity you deserved. Something quieter, something more personal, something that happens in the hidden interior of a human being when they finally become ready to become someone different. And I want to talk to you about this honestly, because I think most people miss it. They're waiting for the turning point to announce itself, but it never does. Here is something that psychology has understood about turning points that most people never hear. A turning point is a moment in time when a person has undergone a major transformation in their view of themselves. Life events, difficulties, life transitions, and internal subjective changes, such as self-realizations or reinterpretations of past experiences, may all be associated with the feeling that life has reached a turning point. Self-realizations, reinterpretations, not external events, internal ones. The same thing happens to two different people, and only one of them has a turning point, because only one of them looked inward when it did. The event didn't change them. The way they saw themselves through the event did. Take a slow breath here, in through the nose, long and steady, out through the mouth. Let it go completely. Now here's the part that should genuinely make you think differently about your own life. Transformation often begins with a spontaneous shift in perception. Disruption or loss can open the door to profound personal change. Sustainable change arises not just when behavior shifts, but when identity shifts. Identity, not habits, not routines, not willpower. Identity. Who you believe yourself to be at the most fundamental level. And here's why that matters so much. Because we don't act against our identity, ever. If you believe, somewhere deep and quiet and mostly unexamined, that you are someone who fails, your behavior will eventually confirm that belief. Not because you want it to, not because you're not trying, but because the brain is extraordinarily loyal to the story it's been given about who you are. Shifting from self-criticism to self-compassion actually changes how the default mode network processes autobiographical memory and identity. The very architecture of how you remember yourself begins to change. The story changes, and then the brain changes, and then the life changes. But it always starts with the story. Let me tell you about the moment before the moment, because the turning point within is almost never what it looks like from the outside. From the outside, it might look like someone who suddenly got motivated, someone who woke up one day and started making different choices, someone who finally seemed to figure it out. But from the inside, the turning point usually feels like a kind of quiet collapse. Not dramatic, not inspiring, a moment when the old version of you just gets tired. Tired of defending a story that was never really true. Tired of running from things that were always going to catch you eventually. Tired of the gap between who you are and who you know, somewhere underneath everything, you could be. The long-lasting positive changes connected to turning points are not necessarily classified as happiness. They are better classified as self-perceived psychological growth, the recognition of personal growth, satisfaction in maturity, a deepening of what you understand about yourself and the world. Not happiness, growth. There is a difference, and it matters. Happiness is a feeling. It comes and goes. Growth is a change in who you are, and it doesn't come back. Breathe again, easy and slow. Let your body soften wherever it's holding tension. Shoulders, jaw, chest. Just let it go for a moment. You're allowed to be still right now. Here's the neuroscience that makes all of this feel more real. Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, continues throughout the entire lifespan. It is not confined to childhood. The brain remains capable of structural change until the very end of life. Let that land. You were not finished being formed when you were 20, or 30, or 40. The brain you have right now is still forming, still adapting, still capable of becoming something it has never been before. Personal transformation is not wishful thinking. It is a biological capacity hardwired into our brains. Every time a person chooses a new response instead of an old pattern, the brain physically changes. Repeated new thoughts, feelings, and behaviors create stronger connections in new neural pathways. Every new choice, every moment of catching the old pattern and choosing differently, every time you notice the automatic reaction rising and pause and respond from somewhere deeper instead, that is not just growth. That is literally, measurably, the physical restructuring of who you are. There is an identity threshold where behavioral change stops being something you practice and starts being characteristic of who you are. Crossing it requires sustained engagement, not insight alone. Not insight alone. This is the turning part people miss. They have the insight, the realization, the moment of clarity at 2 a.m. when they finally see something they hadn't seen before, and they treat the insight like the destination. But the insight is just the door. You still have to walk through it, again and again. In the small, ordinary, unglamorous moments of daily life where nobody is watching, and the old pattern is much easier than the new one. That is where the turning point actually lives, not in the dramatic realization, in what you do the morning after it. So what does this actually feel like from the inside when it's happening? It feels like something being released, something you were carrying that you didn't realize had a choice about, a belief you picked up somewhere in childhood that never actually belonged to you, a version of yourself that was built more for survival than for actually living, a way of being in the world that made sense once, but quietly stopped serving you a long time ago. And in the releasing of it, there is grief, real grief, for the time spent inside the old story, for the opportunities that passed while you were still waiting to feel ready, for the relationships affected by a version of yourself that you now understand differently. Let that grief be real. Don't rush past it, because the grief means the old story mattered, and releasing it means the new one matters more. Take one more breath now, full and slow. In and hold it gently, and out. Long, complete. Here is what I want you to hear before we finish. The turning point within is not something that happens to extraordinary people. It is something available to every human being who gets honest enough to look at themselves without flinching, who sits quietly enough to hear what they've been running from, who chooses just once to respond differently than they always have, and then chooses it again and again. The right mindset is to wake up tomorrow almost exactly the same person, except for one small change, a small change you can replicate every day until you don't notice it anymore. At which point, it's time to make another small change. Not a revolution, a direction. Not a perfect transformation, a consistent turning. The turning point within is not a moment you arrive at. It's a moment you make, over and over, in the quiet choices nobody sees, in the way you speak to yourself when things go wrong, in the decision made again today to become someone slightly more honest than yesterday. The world rarely sees the turning point within. It only sees what comes after. But you will know. You will feel the exact moment when something shifts inside you so deeply and so permanently that the old version of yourself simply no longer fits. And you will know with a quiet certainty that needs no celebration that you are not who you were, and that who you are becoming was always who you were meant to be. Chapter 15. A mind that finally feels free. Start here. Just breathe. One long, slow breath in, let it fill you completely, and release. Not because something is wrong, but because you've been holding tension in your body for so long that you forgot breathing could feel like this, like relief, like coming home to yourself. Stay with that feeling, just for a moment, because that small, quiet sensation right there is the first hint of what we're going to talk about today. What does it actually feel like when a mind is finally free? Not the motivational poster version, not the Instagram caption, the real thing. Because here's the question I want you to sit with. Have you ever had a moment, even just a fleeting one, where you weren't at war with your own thoughts? Where you weren't rehearsing what you should have said, or anticipating what might go wrong, or managing the image of yourself you present to the world? Where you were just here, fully, without the running commentary. If you've had even a single moment like that, you already know what a free mind feels like. And if you can't remember the last time you felt it, then this conversation is for you more than you know. Here's something that genuinely disturbs me when I think about it too long. Most people are living in a mind they never consciously chose. The thoughts you think most often, the beliefs sitting underneath your daily experience like the foundation of a house, the way you talk to yourself in the dark, private spaces where no one else can hear. You didn't select those. They were given to you by experiences, by people, by a childhood that was forming you before you even had the capacity to question what it was teaching you. Failure to examine these unconscious choices means living in a permanent childlike state, trapped inside the body of an adult. It means continuing to make unconscious life choices out of compulsion or conditioning. Over time, this compromises mental health, producing depression, anxiety, and even despair. These are the psychological indicators telling us the time to reclaim our authentic self has come. Reclaim. That word matters because freedom isn't something you find by becoming someone new. It's something you reclaim by becoming more honestly yourself. That's small. Take a breath here, slow and deep. Let your jaw relax. Let your shoulders soften. You don't have to figure anything out in this moment. Just listen. In our restless, unmindful search for happiness, we constantly look for things outside ourselves. What we find is impermanence. We become prisoners of the mind and its contents. We tend to identify ourselves with passing thoughts and feelings and take them as facts. Liberation from suffering lies in our ability to rest in simple, non-judgmental awareness, and not to be so moved by transient mental or sensory experiences. Prisoners of the mind and its contents. That phrase, that specific phrase, because that is exactly what it feels like, isn't it? The thoughts arrive and you don't observe them. You become them. You fuse with them. They pull you into stories that feel urgent, real, permanent. The thought that says you're failing becomes the experience of being a failure. The thought that says nobody really understands you becomes the experience of being fundamentally alone. The thought that says things will never change becomes a truth so solid you stop questioning it. And you've been living inside those stories for years without realizing that the walls around you were made of thoughts. And thoughts can be seen differently. Now here's where the science says something genuinely remarkable. There is compelling behavioral science research suggesting that most of us can, to a considerable degree, create our own state of mind and corresponding sense of self. The most vital freedom has nothing to do with politics or law. It's called freedom of mind. It emerges from the power to define oneself, to formulate one's own identity rather than having it imposed by others. Create our own state of mind, not perfectly, not instantly, not without difficulty, but genuinely, measurably, scientifically. We have far more capacity to shape the inner world than most of us were ever told. Viktor Frankl put it this way: everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Frankl said this after surviving the Holocaust, after losing his family, his manuscript, everything he had built. And still he found this truth. Still. Which means the freedom of mind is not something that requires your circumstances to be perfect. It is available right now, in the life you are already living, in the mind you already have. Take another breath. Easy. Let the exhale be longer than the inhale. Feel the quiet that exists between your thoughts when you stop reaching for the next one. That gap, that tiny available space, that is where freedom lives. Here's the curious thing that research discovered about self-compassion that most people find completely counterintuitive. On days when people felt more self-compassionate, they also felt more authentic. Studies found that self-compassion predicts greater authenticity through reduced fear of negative evaluation and heightened optimism. More authentic, more themselves, not more arrogant, not less motivated, not less likely to try hard or take things seriously, more real, more honest, more free to be who they actually are. Research dispels common myths about self-compassion, that it is weak, selfish, or self-indulgent. Empirical studies indicate that self-compassion is a productive way of approaching distressing thoughts and emotions that genuinely engenders mental and physical well-being. The inner critic, that voice that tells you you're not good enough, that picks apart every decision, that reminds you of your failures at 3 a.m., was never motivating you. It was draining you. And the strange, almost backwards truth is that a mind which learns to be kind to itself becomes more capable, more resilient, more genuinely effective in the world, not softer, freer. Freedom comes from becoming self-aware and taking responsibility. Taking responsibility involves decluttering your mind. The more responsibility you take, the greater the peace of mind, freedom, and self-empowerment you experience. Let's unpack that for a moment, because responsibility and freedom might seem like opposites. Like the more obligations you have, the less free you become. But that's not what this means. This responsibility is the act of owning your inner world, owning your reactions, your patterns, the way you speak to yourself in the quiet moments, not blaming yourself for having them, but choosing, consciously, not to remain asleep inside them. Because the person who says, "I can't help how I think, this is just how I am," is giving their freedom away with both hands. And the person who says, "I don't always like how I think, but I am learning to see it differently," that person is already quietly becoming free. When the mind is allowed to be free, its spontaneous activity reveals something profound, the arising and passing of thoughts, and underneath them, a background of open, awake awareness, a cognizance that precedes conceptualization, that contextualizes experience without fragmenting it into opposing dualities. Open, awake, aware, not empty, not blank, not numb, but spacious, like a sky that can hold any weather without becoming it. A free mind is not a mind with no thoughts. It is a mind that has learned to watch its thoughts without being enslaved by them. It is a mind that no longer needs every question answered before it can rest. It is a mind that can be present in one moment without already being anxious about the next. Breathe here, full and slow, in through the nose. Feel the air fill your chest. Hold it gently for just a moment, and let it go, all the way out. So what does it actually feel like when a mind begins to feel free? It doesn't feel like fireworks. It doesn't feel like a dramatic breakthrough. It feels like a loosening, somewhere in the chest, like something you were gripping finally being allowed to open. It feels like waking up one morning and noticing that the first thought wasn't dread, wasn't the to-do list, wasn't the anxious replay of yesterday's conversation. It was just a moment, quiet, present, yours. It feels like being in a conversation and actually being there, not half somewhere else, managing your image, anticipating judgment, just there, with another person, present. It feels like making a mistake and not instantly collapsing into a story about what that mistake means about you forever. Just, it happened, and life continues. These are not small things. These are the texture of a life lived from freedom rather than from fear. Mental freedom occurs when your mind is working for you instead of against you. You have learned to take responsibility for your life. Your thoughts serve you. You have become the person you really want to be. You have effectively opened your heart, freed your mind, and transformed your life to become bigger than anything that will ever happen to you. Bigger than anything that will ever happen to you. That is what a free mind makes possible. Not a life without difficulty, not a life without pain or loss or uncertainty, but a life where you are no longer defined by any of it, where you are spacious enough, grounded enough, honestly yourself enough that the hard things can move through you without swallowing you whole. This is the ending we've been building toward. All of it. Everything we've explored together. The noise that wouldn't stop. The fear you were avoiding. The truth you were hiding from. The moment everything broke. The uncertainty you were learning to hold. The turning point that was always happening inside you, all of it was leading here, to this. A mind that finally feels free is not a destination you arrive at. It is a way of returning, again and again, to yourself, to the quiet underneath the noise, to the version of you that existed before you were told who to be, to the awareness that has been watching all along, patient, clear, waiting. You don't have to earn this. You don't have to fix yourself first. You don't have to understand everything before you're allowed to feel it. The freedom was always available. You were just too busy fighting yourself to notice it was there. So take one more breath now, long, complete, yours, and let something, just for this moment, be enough. Because you are not a problem to be solved. You are a mind learning to be free, and that is already more than enough to begin.